Archytas listened to the account of the battle and inspected the attack route, showing interest in the grappling hooks. Seeing the heavily guarded city, Archytas advised, Davos, to rule here successfully, you should seek the consent of the citizens. Understood, I replied. Sensing my indifference, Archytas warned, a city needs laws and traditions to thrive. If you start by subverting them, you are like a tree planted crooked. It will never grow into a great, sturdy oak. I understood the metaphor. I reflected on the Roman Republic, where tradition and law constrained even the most powerful leaders like Caesar and Octavian. I realized that if I wanted to rule more than just this small city, I needed to act like a true Greek, not a conqueror, to avoid isolation. I decided to abandon my short-sighted approach and began to think from the perspective of a legitimate Greek leader. Archytas, thank you, I said. I heard the Pythagorean school is struggling in Magna Graecia. Archytas replied sadly, yes. Most cities reject our philosophy, forcing our disciples to flee to Phlius. Only Tarentum remains tolerant. I praised the Pythagorean philosophy of all is number for its potential in governance and lauded the school's promotion of self-discipline and gender equality. I promised that if my mercenaries took control of Amendolara, I would fund a Pythagorean academy there. Archytas was stunned by my unexpected enthusiasm. Are you serious? He asked, doubting such support existed. Shall I swear by the gods? I replied, I thank you on behalf of the school. I will inform our members immediately. Archytas said, visibly moved. Empty, Cornelius felt a mix of anxiety and excitement as he was led into the Senate. For 6 months, Cornelius had lived in hell. Under Lacanian occupation, he faced forced labor, starvation, and abuse. At night, over 1,000 captives were crammed into the temple of Zeus, suffering in filth and misery, while many perished from illness. Having lost all hope, Cornelius had resigned himself to death. However, yesterday's frantic activity among the Lacanians, who were suddenly loading supplies, signaled a shift. A fellow captive who understood the Lacanian language overheard them panicking about a Greek mercenary force that had annihilated the Gramintum army. Hope ignited among the captives. Late that night, they heard the sounds of battle. Lacanian guards fled in terror, shouting, the Greeks have breached the city. Led by the decisive Archon Gratbaflo, the captives broke out of the temple, using stones and fists to overwhelm the remaining, demoralized Lacanian guards. As the captives emerged, they were intercepted by retreating Lacanian warriors attempting to use them as hostages. Gratbaflo and many strong citizens were killed in the ensuing struggle. Just as the Lacanians prepared to massacre the rest, the Greek mercenaries arrived. The mercenaries swiftly crushed the Lacanian forces, forcing them to surrender. The survivors, initially terrified, were soon overwhelmed by the kindness of the soldiers, who provided food, medical care, and comfort. It felt like moving from the underworld to the Elysian fields. Cornelius learned the mercenaries' legend, their service under Cyrus the Younger, their epic march through Persia to Byzantium, and their recent victory over the Lacanian coalition. He was particularly fascinated by me, the God-favored leader who had risen from a common soldier to a tactical genius after a near-death experience. A smiling young man approached Cornelius, greeting him warmly. Lord Cornelius. Who are you? Cornelius asked. This is our leader, Davos, the guard replied. Cornelius was shocked by my youth and approachable demeanor, so unlike the hardened warlord he had imagined. I, aware of Cornelius's noble lineage and high standing among the people, asked with genuine concern, I heard you were injured last night. How are you? Much better, thanks to your doctors, Cornelius replied, expressing deep gratitude for their timely rescue. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing I had intentionally delayed my advance to let the Lacanians thin the ranks of the Amendolara citizens. I have news, I said. We must leave soon. Why? Cornelius asked, stunned. I fabricated a story about Thurii needing their help to defend against a potential Lacanian counterattack from Potentia. Empty, selfish Thurii. May the goddess of misfortune curse them. Cornelius spat. I feigned curiosity about the source of this intense hatred. Cornelius explained how Thurii had forced them to abandon Amendolara to defend Thurii, leaving them vulnerable to the Lacanians. The resulting occupation had led to the slaughter of their people and the desecration of their temples. We hate Thurii more than the Lacanians. I sighed, at a loss for words. I heard your decision to retake the city was yours alone, not Thurii's. Cornelius asked. That is correct. Then we owe them nothing. We will double whatever they pay you if you stay. Cornelius insisted. I explained the financial burden of maintaining 3,000 men, but Cornelius, hearing that the mercenaries had no home, urged me to stay. Stay? Become citizens of Amandalera, Cornelius declared. The city square, once a Lacanian camp, had been cleared of the bloodstains of the previous night's battle. The survivors, mostly women, children, and the elderly, gathered in the square. Cornelius and 4 other prominent citizens stood on the platform. Looking at the pathetic remnants of their once thriving city, Cornelius felt a renewed sense of purpose. Cornelius addressed the crowd, recounting their history and the recent tragedy caused by their alliance with Thurii. He spoke of the suffering they endured and how Zeus had sent the Greek mercenaries to save them. He pointed to me and my men standing nearby. The crowd, especially the women, resonated with his praise for the mercenaries' kindness. But they are leaving, Cornelius announced, causing panic. Who will protect us? Thurii. The crowd erupted in curses. We would rather perish than be deceived by Thurii again, they shouted. Cornelius seized the moment. We must defend ourselves. But we are too weak. What shall we do? He proposed an emergency assembly of citizens, inviting everyone, including women, to vote on a vital motion. Archytas watched in amazement. Allowing women to vote was unprecedented in Greek history. I smiled. I knew the women, more emotional and desperate for protection, would be the key to securing my men's future. My proposal, Cornelius announced, is to grant citizenship to all our saviors, the mercenaries. The crowd was stunned by the scale of the request. After a moment of silence, a woman raised her hand, shouting, "Agreed." The square erupted in a chorus of approval. "Empty, your wish is granted, Davos." "Congratulations," Archytas said. "Thank you," I replied. "Now I hope Tarentum will agree to an alliance." Cornelius announced the results. 1,076 in favor, 306 against. From this moment on, all mercenaries are citizens of Amandalera. The soldiers cheered, hugging me. "Leader, we have a home." I felt a bittersweet pang. My true home was not in this world. Meanwhile, the Thurii envoy, led by Ansitanos, arrived at the gates. "We are envoys from Thurii. Open the gates," Urkos shouted. A voice from the wall retorted. "Go back, Thurii. You are not welcome here." Ansitanos, usually mild-mannered, shouted in anger, "Rude mercenaries. Do not think your victory allows you to ignore the laws of the Greek city-states." The man on the wall sneered. "How noble. I am a citizen of Amandalera, born and raised here. We know exactly what you are." Ansitanos was stunned, but Burkos recognized the man immediately as a frequent trading partner. "Is that you, Antichrist? Surprised I'm alive?" Antichrist spat with venom. "Thanks to Thurii, the Lacanians severed my right hand. My neighbors and comrades died because of your selfish demands, forcing them to flee to that cursed Thurii, where they were slaughtered while defenseless. Thurii is no longer welcome here. This is the will of every survivor." Burkos, Ansitanos, and the entire envoy were left speechless by this hostile reception. Thurii, with over 100,000 residents, treated the tiny Amandalera as a mere vassal. When Amandalera fell to the Lacanians, Thurii offered only indifference, ignoring pleas for aid. Now, the deep-seated resentment shocked them. Antichrist laughed, declaring that the Amandalera citizens had voted to grant the mercenaries full citizenship. "They didn't seize our city. They are our new citizens. Anyone who dares attack us will face the shields and spears of these veterans." The threat hung heavy in the air. Amidst Antichrist's laughter, the Thurian envoys retreated in defeat. Antichrist turned to a sentry, eyeing him with unsettling satisfaction. "What is your name?" "Teloadadaisai. From Thessaly, a fellow countryman of mine. I am 28. Antichrist cut to the chase. "I have 2 daughters. One is 21, a widow with a toddler. The other is 16 and unmarried. Choose one to be my son-in-law. We marry tomorrow." Teloadadaisai was stunned, while other soldiers teased him, with one brazenly asking, "You have 2 daughters. Why not take me as the other's son-in-law?" Laughter erupted on the walls. The Thurian envoys, retreating, asked who Antichrist was. A noble of Amandalera, formerly the captain of the patrol and fire brigade, Burkos replied. Ansitanos merely grunted. General, Burkos consoled him, I am young but steady. We have a contract. I won't be easily swayed by these people. Once tempers cool, we can negotiate. I hope so, Ansitanos sighed. With the mercenaries now citizens, our protests are useless. We must rethink our strategy. Do you know what I'm thinking? No. My teacher said that after the Greco-Persian Wars, Sparta's arrogance drove allies toward the Kinder Athens, forming the Delian League. Have we been too overbearing? Acting with pride despite our lack of true strength is a dangerous path. After the referendum, the women and children left, and Cornelius asked Archytas to step aside for the true assembly of citizens. There were 512 original Amandalera citizens and 2,920 new ones, 1,837 of my mercenaries and 1,083 others, totaling 3,432 citizens. Cornelius tried to proceed, but the mercenaries' cheering forced a delay. He eventually shouted, Citizens, as most of you are new, you must understand our system. It is similar to Athens. No content. The assembly holds supreme power. We have 2 archons for life management and military command, elected annually. The 100-man Senate, also elected annually, proposes laws and assists the archons. Normally, archons are elected in June. But given our state, we must elect them today. I invite me and my officers to help select candidates. The new citizens grew restless. Why bother with candidates? I must be our archon, someone shouted. The crowd erupted. Only me. I lead us to miracles. I am our undefeated commander. Nearly 3,000 voices chanted my name in a display of overwhelming momentum. Cornelius, panicked, looked to me for help. I whispered to assists, who ran to the back of the square. A piercing bronze horn blast silenced the crowd instantly. Cornelius realized my election was inevitable. He hoped to at least secure the second archon seat for an original citizen. As Cornelius hesitated, a voice cried out, Brothers, I am our leader, but I share power. Who else is as capable? Who else is favored by the gods? No one, the crowd roared. Do you want an incompetent stranger ruling you? Another shouted. No. Is democracy truly good? Look at Athens, destroyed by squabbling politicians. Look at the Euxine Sea cities. A city needs a wise general, not a committee. Do you want to live as free but bullied citizens, or grow strong under me? I gave a subtle nod to the speaker, Oliverus. I for king, a voice bellowed. The original citizens and Cornelius were horrified. Sicida and Adrianx watched me and my officers, who remained calm. They realized the agitators were all from the original Helos squad. The chant, I for king, grew louder and more rhythmic. Cornelius and his peers were paralyzed by fear. None dared oppose the thousands of armed men. The original citizens were too weak to resist, and the soldiers were emboldened by their own strength. Cornelius regretted admitting the mercenaries, but he was trapped. He begged me for help with his eyes. I stepped onto the platform. The crowd roared, I for king. Cornelius stepped aside, his expression complex. I raised my hands, and the square fell silent. Citizens, when we left Byzantium, I promised you land and citizenship. In 2 months, you have earned it with your blood and sweat. Congratulations. The crowd cheered, some weeping with joy. I am honored you want me as king. But to me, kingship is not about power. It is about the responsibility to make this city strong and prosperous. However, I paused, and Cornelius held his breath. I cannot be king. The crowd fell into an uproar. Why? They demanded. Most Greek cities despise kings. If I become king, we will be isolated and attacked. To trade and form alliances, we must remain a city-state. For Amandalera's sake, I cannot accept. No content. Cornelius and the others were relieved, seeing my clear-headedness. The soldiers, however, were disappointed. Helos shouted from the crowd. If not king, then archon for life. Like Dionysius of Syracuse, they aren't hated, they are sought after. Yes, archon for life. Oliverus added. The chant shifted. Archon for life. Cornelius panicked, knowing Dionysius took power by force, not election. I looked at the crowd and declared, Since the citizens have chosen, I accept. I swear by Hades to use all my wisdom to lead Amandalora to prosperity. The crowd erupted in cheers. Cornelius's companions whispered in terror, urging him to intervene. Cornelius stepped forward. This violates our laws and traditions. This is a farce. I turned, my gaze piercing. A farce? Is the assembly not the supreme power? Did they not vote for this? Is this not the legal procedure? Cornelius stammered. But, would you tell them their will is wrong? I sneered. Cornelius looked at the sea of cheering soldiers and shrank back. I continued. After Athens fell, many lost faith in democracy. The 30 tyrants rose because of that. Amandalora's suffering was caused by the indecision of our democratic leaders. The original citizens were silenced by the truth of my words. I promised. I swear by Hades, your rights will be protected and improved. Voices from the crowd shouted. I agree to me as Archon for life. I agree. Cornelius walked to the front, heavy-hearted. He didn't know the consequences, but he knew that if he refused, the mercenaries would tear the city apart. Cornelius, resigned to his fate, stood before the assembly and announced, the proposal for me to serve as Archon for life of Amandalora is passed. From this day forward, I shall hold this office until I return to the underworld. Victory! Victory! The new citizens cheered wildly, creating a sea of celebration. The original citizens reacted with a mix of silent rage, indifference, or forced participation. Saisida and a few officers hid their disappointment behind strained smiles. I stepped forward, smiling, and declared, as your new Archon for life, I propose Cornelius as Deputy Archon to assist in governance. The crowd cheered in agreement, believing Cornelius would keep the young, foreign Archon in check, unaware that Cornelius was internally devastated. Cornelius was crushed not just by the new structure, but by the loss of the dual Archon tradition. He realized I was effectively establishing a dictatorship, rendering the deputy position a mere subordinate role. I, skeptical of the democratic systems I had witnessed, believed that in this era of war, a centralized, efficient leadership was superior to fragmented rule. I understood that my mercenaries, accustomed to the discipline of war and the grandeur of the Persian Empire, were more inclined to follow a proven leader than to demand traditional Greek democratic processes. I had meticulously planned this. I rebranded Dictator as Archon for life to avoid alienating other city-states, mirroring the historical precedents of Sulla and Caesar. Looking out at the crowd, I felt the weight of the transition. The old Amandalora was ending. A new one would rise tomorrow. I knew my path to greatness would be long and fraught with brutal challenges. Next volume, the First Croton War. That evening, the Amandalora Senate was brightly lit. I convened a meeting with Cornelius, prominent local citizens, military leaders like Saisida and Adrianx, and my own officers to discuss the city's reconstruction. As the sole Archon for life, I presided over the meeting. Citizens, we must prioritize the selection of new senators. I defined the Senate's role to advise the Archon, nominate officials, oversee finances and public morality, and propose laws. I urged the former mercenaries to learn administration from the experienced local citizens. Cornelius was stunned by the 20-year-old's political acumen, wondering if it truly was divine inspiration from Hades. He barely noticed that I had subtly altered the Senate's traditional functions. I proposed Cornelius, Tritodemos, Citolomboli, Scombros, and Raphias as senators, I announced. The 5 new appointees were delighted, seeing this as a reward for their support. The officers voted agreed, feeling a sense of duty to compensate the locals for the shift in power. I also nominate Saisida, Adrianx, and Dracos, I continued. The motion passed unanimously. Saisida stood to express his gratitude, pledging the loyalty of the mercenaries to the Archon and the city-state. I applauded, gaining a new respect for Saisida. I then nominated 12 high-ranking officers and 2 department heads to the Senate. The assembly roared its approval. I then addressed the remaining officers. As for the rest of you, I am not appointing you to the Senate at this time. A ripple of disappointment passed through the back rows, but no one dared challenge me. I explained, you are young and lack administrative experience. However, the Senate remains open to those who prove themselves through service. The officers were immediately re-energized. I warned the new senators that while the position was prestigious, it was not a sinecure. Those who failed to perform or broke the law would be removed. The group felt a sudden, sobering tension. Cornelius, do you have anything to add? I asked. Cornelius took the floor to lecture the newcomers on the honor of unpaid service, then reminded me that the Senate required 100 members. We will leave the remaining seats vacant for now, I dismissed, refusing to be constrained by tradition or lower the quality of the Senate for the sake of numbers. Cornelius stopped arguing. I asked, what administrative positions exist in Amendolara? Cornelius explained. The city magistrate assists the Archon, maintains order, and oversees litigation, including the patrol, fire brigade, and prison. It's a one-year term, with candidates nominated by the Senate and finalized by the Archon. I realized the role was similar to a Roman praetor. I told Cornelius, the city magistrate's duties are more comprehensive and better accepted than the deputy Archon, which I now deem redundant. You shall take the magistrate position. Empty. The proposal was well received, especially by new citizens who feared the legal complexities of the city. Cornelius, respected by both locals and mercenaries, was the ideal mediator for inevitable conflicts. Cornelius felt sidelined. His new role was a subordinate one, stripping him of the influence he held as deputy Archon. However, seeing my political acumen and the support of figures like Raphaeus, he realized he had no leverage. I accept the position of city magistrate, he conceded. I smiled. Excellent. Given the burden of maintaining order, you need a capable patrol captain. I addressed the assembly. I encourage you to start from the bottom to gain experience. Any senator or citizen may nominate themselves for patrol captain. The position is already filled, Cornelius noted. By whom? I asked. Antichris, who also serves as fire chief. He is well regarded, though he lost his right hand to the Lacanians. I replied, his injury limits his ability to suppress unrest. Let him focus solely on the fire brigade, a vital role in this mountain city. I propose adding a deputy fire chief to assist him. Cornelius agreed, impressed by my practical understanding of the city's disaster risks. When I called for candidates for patrol captain, Sicida, Helos, and others stood up. I intervened. Sicida, the former mercenaries are numerous and rowdy. They won't respect you. I recommend Helos for the role. Helos pledged, I will ensure order and assist Magistrate Cornelius. I looked to Cornelius. What do you think? I agree, Cornelius replied, recognizing my intent to control the city's armed forces. Sicida, showing no resentment, immediately volunteered for deputy fire chief. I approved the appointments. Next, the Ephor? I asked. The room erupted in laughter. I explained to a confused Cornelius. We fought alongside Spartan Ephors in Persia, so my men think they understand the role, though it surely differs here. How so? Oliverus asked. Spartan Ephors can oversee their kings, I noted, ensuring the room understood that such power would not exist in Amendolara. The group was stunned by the revelation of Spartan power. Cornelius began to believe the rumors that I was truly God-favored. Cornelius listed the Ephors' duties, auditing the Senate, monitoring attendance, enforcing public morality, conducting censuses, and overseeing public works and finances. The assembly gasped at the immense power involved. I warned, this role requires literacy and mathematical skill to manage reports and audits. I kept to myself that one could simply hire a skilled slave, though such assets were expensive. Most withdrew, but Antonius, Alexis, and the nobles Raphaeus and Sita Longbally stepped forward. A vote was held, and Antonius won, largely due to his popularity among the former Helos squad members who now held officer ranks. I consoled Alexis. It's a one-year term. Your chance will come. Alexis laughed. I'll just wait for Antonius to fail. Antonius bristled, drawing laughter from the new citizens, while the local nobles remained silent. Finally, Cornelius said, we need a treasurer to manage the treasury, taxes, public property like stone quarries, and population records. Mercis and Raphaeus volunteered. I teased, Oliverus, why not you? Oliverus shook his head. Math gives me a headache. If I miscalculate the taxes, I'd be ruined. The room laughed. Mercis is best, Oliverus added. He managed our baggage train perfectly, with never a coin missing or a complaint filed. To avoid alienating the local nobles by favoring former mercenaries for every post, I proposed splitting the roles. I suggested Mercis as treasurer and Raphias as census officer, tasking the latter with managing the complex records of citizens, families, slaves, and freemen. Empty. Cornelius realized I was systematically restructuring Amendollara's political framework. With me firmly in control of the Senate, Cornelius could only agree. Both appointments were approved without opposition. Mercis immediately reported that after accounting for spoils from the Lacanians, the national treasury held a meager 3,000 drachma. Epitines joked about the new treasurer's immediate zeal, drawing laughter from the assembly. I frowned, noting that 3,000 silver coins didn't even amount to a single talent. Embarrassed, Cornelius explained that Amendollara lacked a port and trade, with Heraclea being their only consistent buyer of stone. I proposed creating a trade officer position to manage commerce and generate revenue for the city-state. Mercis immediately recommended Maligi. Surprised, I asked if they had reconciled. Mercis hadn't, but he prioritized financial pragmatism, acknowledging Maligi's proven ability to make money. Oliverus supported the nomination, citing Maligi's success in managing the camp market. Epitines agreed, noting the vibrancy of the market Maligi had run. Matones teased Oliverus, claiming he only supported Maligi to curry favor with his future father-in-law. Oliverus snapped at him to be quiet. I sternly silenced them, warning that the Senate was no place for bickering. Matones and Oliverus fell silent, while Cornelius questioned Maligi's Persian background. I defended Maligi, explaining he was a former mercenary who fled Persian persecution, fought the Lacanians, and was now a full citizen. I noted Maligi was currently in Tarentum negotiating an alliance and expressed full confidence in his ability to fill the treasury. Cornelius listened intently but hesitated, glancing at Raphias to see if the new census officer would voice any objections. Raphias hesitated, then stood up, but he is a Persian. No Greek city-state has ever allowed that. What does being Persian matter? I stood abruptly, addressing the assembly. Since the census officer raised this, I will share my views on our future. In most Greek city-states, citizenship is strictly guarded. Sparta forbids it for outsiders. Athens requires both parents to be Athenian. Why is it so exclusive? I paused, letting the new citizens reflect on the blood and sweat they shed to earn their own status. Because they fear outsiders sharing their political power, land, and wealth. Alexis spat. Exactly. This selfishness prevents growth. Athens collapsed after Sicily due to a lack of young citizens. Sparta, despite its hegemony, relies on mercenaries because its citizen count is dwindling while they guard against Helot revolts. Even our neighbor Thurii cowers in fear because they lack the manpower to defend themselves. The room erupted in laughter, the old citizens agreeing with the assessment of Thurii. Look at Persia, I asked. Is their territory vast? Yes, immense, the new citizens replied. And are they populous? Diverse. Yes, full of every race. Persia began as a small, oppressed tribe under the Medes. Cyrus, their leader, was wise and open-minded. He welcomed other tribes, and as he grew, even his former enemies joined him. Like a snowball rolling down a mountain, a small tribe became a vast empire in decades. The assembly listened intently, even the educated Cornelius finding the history of the East fascinating. Persia is strong because it embraces others, just as the Mediterranean is vast because it receives countless rivers. If you are content farming in a small city-state until you are forced to surrender to a stronger power, then stay silent. But if you want Amendollara to be strong, remember, people are a city-state's greatest wealth. We must be open and welcome anyone willing to contribute, regardless of origin. We lack land only if you keep your eyes fixed on our current borders. I pointed westward with fervor. Look around us. The Lacanians, Bruttians, Messapians, Pusetians, Daunians, and Samnites, do they not possess enough land and wealth for us all? Defeat them. Seize their land. Matones and the squad leaders roared. The new citizens, former mercenaries who lived for battle, were electrified by this grand ambition, which solidified my power and gave them a new purpose. Empty, but war brings death, Cornelius stammered. Amendollara has already lost too many. With Davos, we only win. Amintas countered with a sneer. Don't you want revenge against the Lacanians? Before Cornelius could reply, Protesilaus and Tritodemos shouted, Of course. We must make those barbarians pay. Seeing the hunger for change, I concluded, we will not fight blindly. We will grow strong first. Do you agree to submit a proposal to the Assembly that any outsider willing to obey our laws and meet set requirements may become a citizen? We shall discuss the specific criteria later. Agreed, the crowd shouted in unison. Cornelius sighed, eyes closed. He realized Amendolara would no longer be the conservative, stagnant town of the past. With the new citizens in the majority, the bill was certain to pass. Days later, the Assembly passed my proposal by a landslide. Known as the Davos Immigration Law, it would reshape Magna Graecia's political landscape and Mediterranean history. I nominate Maligi for trade officer, making him the first beneficiary of this law and a model for others. Agreed. The new citizens, especially the platoon leaders, cheered. I had ensured their presence to silence any dissent from the old citizens. With a new goal, the atmosphere shifted. I pressed my advantage. Does Amendolara have an edile? Edile? Cornelius asked. We have no fixed office for public works. The Senate appoints temporary overseers as needed. An edile oversees construction, maintenance, sanitation, and public entertainment. From wells and roads to temples and circuses, it is a vital role, I explained. Which city-state has such a position? Cornelius asked, surprised. I smiled, keeping the origin, Rome, to myself. To expand against the natives, we need roads and bridges for logistics, and grand architecture to showcase our culture. Who volunteers? Hesitation rippled through the crowd. Construction experience seemed necessary. Alexis stood up decisively. I asked, were you a mason? Archon, since I am the only volunteer, does that mean I am appointed? Alexis countered. I looked to the crowd. Any objections? Receiving none, I asked, how will you handle the job? I will learn, Alexis said confidently. I will hire experts from nearby cities and use your new law to grant them citizenship. The crowd realized the potential of the new system. I praised him, study hard. I want Amendolara's architecture to lead all Greek city-states. I will do my best. Alexis vowed. Cornelius warned. Our treasury is tight for such grand projects. We will build the foundation now and expand when we are wealthy, I reassured him. Next, I propose a military officer to handle defense, training, equipment, and logistics. The militant new citizens cheered. I asked, who is best suited for this? The new citizens fell silent. I was already Archon. Hieronymus was a newcomer. Other leaders like Capus and Amintas were capable but lacked clear distinction. All eyes turned to Felicius. The quiet, experienced deputy had been the backbone of my success, handling the very tasks the new office required. He was the perfect choice. Felicius was elected. I want you to help me draft a comprehensive military code, I instructed. Felicius nodded, while Matones and others groaned at the prospect of stricter discipline. I sternly addressed them. We are no longer mercenaries looting for survival. We are citizens of Amendolara. Our conduct represents our city. To conquer the natives and lead Magna Graecia, we must have a disciplined, professional citizen army. The new citizens, inspired, pledged to follow the new code. Sicida and Adrianx were eager to experience the legendary discipline of my forces. Cornelius and the old citizens, unfamiliar with such formal military law, listened with interest. Cornelius cautioned, ensure training does not interfere with daily labor. Felicius will manage that, I said, suggesting the platoon leaders approach him for instructor roles. Dozens swarmed Felicius, eager to prove themselves. Though not scholars, these officers were masters of war and desperate to demonstrate their value to the city. They are eager to serve, I remarked with satisfaction. Cornelius nodded outwardly, though he privately worried that these battle-hardened new citizens would struggle to respect the city-state's laws. My announcement that these were the primary public offices left Cornelius relieved, though he remained conflicted by how each new role challenged Amendolara's traditions. My solemn expression signaled a new, urgent matter for the Senate and officers to address. The settlement and land distribution for our new citizens, I declared. The officers immediately ceased their bickering, hanging on my every word. I argued that keeping these veterans in tents was unsustainable and unjust. To honor their sacrifices and secure Amandalara's future, they must be settled and granted their rightful land immediately to prevent unrest. My words electrified the new citizens, while the original citizens looked on with grim concern. I asked Cornelius for the number of war widows in the city. Cornelius estimated over 1,000, deferring to the census officer, Raphaeus, for the exact count. Raphaeus promised to finalize the statistics immediately after the meeting. I ordered a public gathering the next morning. Unmarried soldiers and widows would meet to form voluntary unions, free from coercion or arranged marriages. I also encouraged unmarried local maidens to attend. The new citizens were ecstatic. For the 2,000 bachelors, this was a windfall, not only a chance for marriage, but an opportunity to inherit the land and wealth of the widow's late husbands. Great news. My brothers finally have a chance. Don't get cocky, Matonis, one officer teased. Strength alone won't win a woman's heart. They traded barbs about strength, farming, and romantic prospects, with Oliverus warned about his Persian companion. Hieronymus was urged to step out of his shell and lead by example for his men. I encouraged Geogris to trust in Aphrodite and follow his heart. The officers joked amongst themselves, while I watched my men with a smile. The original citizens felt uneasy. Greek tradition strictly sequestered women, and these public unions were a radical departure. However, with the population decimated and the city vulnerable, they accepted this as a necessary evil to integrate the mercenaries and secure the city's defense. I solemnly instructed the men to treat their new families with honor, care for stepchildren and elders, and never blame the women for the humiliations suffered under the Lucanians. I vowed that Amendalara would eventually strike back at Lucania. The new citizens cheered, vowing to protect their new families and take vengeance on the Lucanians. The original citizens, however, felt the sting of my rebuke regarding their failure to protect their own. I proposed a grand, collective wedding ceremony for all couples, including my own, to be held on an auspicious day. The crowd erupted in excitement, cheering for me and my bride-to-be, Calixitoia. I ignored the teasing and asked Cornelius if they had a priest of Hera. Cornelius noted that Amendalara worshipped Zeus, and the nearest notable temple of Hera was in Metapontum. I ordered an envoy to Metapontum to invite a priest to bless the weddings. Cornelius was confused, as Hera's priests were not traditionally involved in such ceremonies. I insisted that the wedding symbolized Amandalara's rebirth, and as Archon, I claimed the authority to oversee rituals and establish festivals. Cornelius knew that power belonged to the Senate, not the Archon. Yet, worn down by my previous power grabs, Cornelius reluctantly agreed, effectively ceding religious oversight to the Archon for life. Empty. I proposed establishing a marriage festival and a festival for Hera to commemorate the city's suffering and rebirth. Cornelius, impressed by my foresight and genuine concern for the city, fully supported the idea. Both the original and new citizens enthusiastically agreed to the new festivals. Silas then asked how the remaining unmarried soldiers would be settled. I signaled for Cornelius to answer. Cornelius explained with a heavy heart that the city had thousands of empty homes left by families wiped out in the war, which could be repurposed for the new citizens. I reinforced this, mandating that any soldier inheriting land and wealth must also assume the responsibility of caring for the original owners' surviving children and elders. Silas promised that the officers would ensure the elderly and children were cared for. Amintas added, "Anyone who occupies a house but neglects the vulnerable will answer to me." I instructed the officers to supervise their men, noting that the Senate would formalize this. I tasked Antonius, as Ephor, to report any neglect or abuse, warning that offenders would lose their citizenship and be expelled from Amendalara. Antonius solemnly pledged to enforce the oversight. The veteran citizens nodded, approving of my commitment to protecting the vulnerable. I shifted to the land issue, announcing that the Senate would guarantee every new citizen at least 5 acres. I promised that Treasurer Mercis would inventory current holdings, ensuring those with less land would receive priority when new territory was acquired. The crowd cheered in agreement, calling the plan fair. I then addressed a long-pondered, sensitive topic, the necessity of funding the city-state. I reminded them that while military service is a citizen's right and duty, the city's survival, infrastructure, defense, and logistics requires significant capital. Both veteran and new citizens nodded in recognition. I explained that without a paid bureaucracy, officials would eventually struggle to manage their private farms, leading to a decline in governance. A healthy city-state requires a robust national treasury. The new citizens were intrigued by this insight, while the veterans were impressed by my foresight. Cornelius, however, sensed an impending storm. I noted that Amandalara's treasury was insufficient. I warned that future immigrants, who would gain citizenship easily, might lack the dedication of the current defenders if they didn't contribute to the state. The veterans agreed, still harboring resentment toward the Immigration Act. I proposed a 1% land tax for all citizens. The assembly erupted in immediate, chaotic protest. Cornelius was stunned, while Sitalambali asked in disbelief if I truly intended to tax citizens. Scambras confronted me, accusing me of violating Greek tradition and acting like a tyrant. Matonis and the squad leaders rushed to defend me, pushing Scambras back. Scambras shouted that the soldiers were ignorant of the dire consequences of such attacks. The young officers, angered by the insult, threatened to strike the old man. Scambras collapsed from the commotion, forcing the veterans to rush to his aid as arguments flared. I stepped in, shouting for order until the factions were separated. Matonis glared at Scambras, silencing him. Mercis, the treasurer, defended the tax, citing Persia's much higher rates. Sitalambali retorted that Greece had no such tradition. Mercis countered that it existed during the Age of Kings. Sitalambali reminded me of my promise not to be a king, warning that the citizens would reject the tax. I smiled, revealing the rest of my plan. Existing citizens would be exempt from the tax on current lands. To honor them, I would issue founders silver buckles of Amandalara to be worn on their Borton during public events. The veterans were mollified, their pride restored by the recognition of their status and the exemption. Scambras was the first to shout his agreement. Matonis protested, arguing it was unfair to tax only the new citizens. Empty. I continued, granting the new citizens an exemption on their current lands and promising them new citizen silver buckles to commemorate their role in reclaiming the city. Matonis was satisfied, and the new citizens stood tall with pride. I had successfully balanced the two factions, leaving Cornelius in awe of my political maneuvering. Mercis questioned the point of the law if no one paid taxes. Cornelius explained that the tax would apply to all future land acquisitions. I confirmed that only current holdings were exempt. All future land would be subject to the tax. I accept, Antonius declared. We must respect the suffering of Cornelius's ancestors who founded Amandalara, but we have earned our place through blood and sweat. New citizens must contribute to the city they join. Taxation is the perfect solution. Well said, Antonius. We agree, the new citizens cheered. We are the founders of this new Amandalara. Our tax-exempt land and silver coins will be our legacy, Protesilaus shouted, and the old citizens did not object. The assembly concluded. New citizens headed to the square, while the old citizens retreated to the rugged mountain paths. Cornelius, you were too lenient. You let that young man manipulate those ignorant mercenaries without a single word of opposition. Sitalambali complained loudly. Careful, Sitalambali, Raphias warned, glancing back. Davos is our Archon. We must show him respect. Archon. He acts like a king. He never consults the Senate or us before proposing these radical changes, using his obedient mercenaries to steamroll the assembly. Are we just puppets? Sitalambali fumed. Scambras interrupted. If you had such strong opinions, why stay silent during the meeting? Sitalambali stammered. I'm not stupid. Why oppose him alone? Oh, I see. You're all too busy enjoying your new titles as magistrate and census officer to bite the hand that feeds you. Scambras stepped forward, eyes flashing. Shut up. Cornelius has done his best to protect this city. These bills are actually intriguing, especially the tax law. Amandalara hasn't changed in a century. Perhaps it's time. Scambras is right, Tridademos added solemnly. If these changes, or even a lifetime Archon, can restore Amandalara's strength and end our humiliation, I accept them. We won't just stop at defense, young Protesilaus cried. We will march into Lucania and take our revenge. Sita Longbali scoffed. Lucania is vast and mountainous. That young Archon is just boasting. He crushed the Lacanian coalition and reclaimed Amendalara in a single night, Protesilaus retorted. Which of our local generals could claim the same? Sita Longbali snorted and fell silent. Did you see how the new citizens look at him? Protesilaus whispered. Like he's a deity. They call him God-favored. Tritodemos mused. Perhaps he can work miracles. I've heard of a beautiful lake in the upper Sini River region. The Lacanians call it Dakala. Maybe I'll finally get to see it and own land there. Sita Longbali grunted, his anger visibly cooling. War always brings death, Cornelius sighed. Better to avoid it if possible. The mercenaries seem eager enough, Raphaeus shrugged. They are our citizens now, Cornelius reminded them. Still, we underestimated Davos. He's young, but politically astute. Is it true what they say, that Hades granted him wisdom? No one argued. They were all equally stunned. We must observe him further, Cornelius cautioned. We don't know the long-term impact of these laws. We must ensure stability and guide him when necessary. At least he is not like Dionysius of Syracuse. The others nodded, but Sita Longbali growled. And if he ruins Amendalara and refuses to listen? Cornelius hesitated, unable to answer. Then we drive them out, Scombros said firmly. For Amendalara, we would even cooperate with Thurii again. They nodded in silent agreement. I returned to the square late that night. Inside my tent, the candles were still burning. Calixituoya had fallen asleep waiting for me. I watched her mesmerized. In this strange, lonely world, she had become my only true harbor. I touched her hair, and she stirred, rubbing her eyes. You're back, she murmured. I took her hands. Calixituoya of Miletus, will you be my wife? Her eyes lit up, shining in the candlelight. She embraced me tightly. I will. Later, as she rested on my chest, I spoke of the assembly. Calixituoya, I have a task for you, though I hesitate to ask. What is it? She asked. Have you heard of a bank? Yes, for lending. My father in Miletus operated one. He admired Passion of Athens, who became the richest man in the city through banking and earned great respect. She recalled with a hint of melancholy. Perfect, I said. I want you to open a bank in Amendalara to provide loans to our citizens. A bank? Me? She gasped. Yes, you. I said, looking at her with total trust. You manage the medical corps brilliantly. I know you can run this bank. Calixituoya steadied herself, reminding me. That requires a significant amount of silver. Empty. Don't worry about the capital, I explained, detailing my savings. Over a talent of silver left by Menon in the baggage train, nearly another talent from our spoils of war, and the profits Maligi and Mercis generated from the market. I told her I would have Mercis turn these funds over to her. Calixituoya wasn't dazzled by the wealth. Instead, she warned, banking invites resentment. Few bankers end up like Lysian. As Archon of Amendalara, I fear this will draw criticism or even opposition against you. I smiled, pleased by her foresight. Your concern proves I made the right choice. I explained that while traditional lenders are hated for their exorbitant interest rates, often 20% or more, which ruin families, my bank would be different. As Archon, I want our citizens to prosper. I want you to set the interest rate at no more than 5%. Only 5%, she exclaimed in shock. Such a low rate will allow talented citizens to borrow safely and rescue those trapped by usury, I said confidently. I believe this bank will accelerate Amendalara's post-war economic recovery and drive trade development. The next day, the new citizens, usually disheveled from constant warfare, cleared the square and tidied themselves up, donning clean, Dorian-style linen chitons that made them appear tall and dignified. They waited expectantly until the women of Amendalara arrived. Led by the elders, the women appeared shy yet curious. They had adorned themselves with elegant folds in their chitons, fastened with fine metal clasps, and styled their hair and makeup to look their best. Upon seeing them, the new citizens swarmed forward like bees to flowers, abandoning all pretense of composure to charm the women they fancied. I arranged for veteran citizens to play harps and flutes, adding a romantic atmosphere to the mass matchmaking event in Amendalara. The plaza quickly turned rowdy as popular women drew competitive suitors. I intervened with my patrol to settle disputes and confirm the women's choices. Couples who matched either left to walk the mountain paths or registered with the census officer, Raphius. With my reform, registration officially recognized them as married, bypassing traditional delays until the formal wedding ceremony. Women who were older or less conventionally attractive took the initiative, approaching men to highlight their skills in weaving, brewing, or oil production, or boasting of their noble lineage and wealth. By afternoon, most women had left the plaza, though many men remained. I noticed a large crowd of new citizens gathered around a beautiful young noblewoman who had rejected every suitor, causing a persistent, potentially volatile standoff. Curious and concerned about potential conflict, I summoned Raphias and pushed through the crowd. A bystander joked, "Hey, girl, Archon Davos is here. If you don't like him, you'll have to marry a god." The woman opened her eyes and looked up. I was struck by her beauty. Raphias whispered that she was Andrea, a 20-year-old widow whose husband had died fighting in the Lucania campaign at Laos, leaving her to raise their 3-year-old son alone. As Raphias spoke, Andrea stepped forward and asked, "Are you Archon Davos?" "It's me. I need to talk to you," Andrea said bluntly. I paused, then agreed, though Andrea glanced around and requested, "Can we speak in private?" Sensing the gravity of the situation, I hesitated, but seeing the urgency in Andrea's eyes, I nodded and said, "Follow me." As I led her away, some new citizens grumbled, "Leader Davos, you already have the beautiful Calixichoya. Don't take her from us." I laughed. "Relax, brothers. She just needs a word in private. You know, if I stepped out of line, Calixichoya wouldn't let me into the house tonight." My joke drew laughter, and the men cleared a path. I led Andrea to a secluded corner of the square guarded by a patrol. "Speak," I whispered. "What is it?" Andrea bit her lip, hesitating several times before finally gathering the courage to ask. "I want to know, how is Bagyul doing?" "Who is Bagyul?" I asked, puzzled. "He's a Lacanian." Andrea's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw you strike him down and capture him at the temple. How is he now?" Seeing her blushing cheeks, I understood immediately. "You've fallen for a Lacanian?" "What?" My calm tone terrified Andrea. I just... Don't be nervous. I'm not blaming you. Tell me the truth. Perhaps I can help." Something stirred in me, and I gently reassured her. "Really? You can truly help me?" Andrea cried out, clutching at the hope like a drowning woman at a rope. I motioned for silence. "First tell me why you favor him." At last Andrea shyly began her story. Once praised as the Rose of Amandalora, Andrea had many suitors before her father married her, for years ago, to a rich and handsome young Amandalora noble. Content at first despite never meeting him before the wedding, she soon found him insanely jealous. He forbade her any contact with men and even had 2 male slaves put to death over it. Barely 16 and full of life, she was shut away at home. Worse, he drank heavily, often returning from banquets roaring drunk to beat and torment her. She fled to her parents, but her father forced her back, warning that a wife must serve her husband as a slave serves her master, and never return lest the family become a laughingstock. Trembling, she went home and endured everything he did. Pregnancy briefly halted the cruelty, but he turned instead to courtesans and slave women, a common habit among Greek citizen men that she could barely tolerate. What she could not bear was being forced to stand by and watch those private encounters, her dignity as a highborn city-state wife crushed under the slave women's stares. When she finally clashed with him, he once beat her unconscious. From then on she feared and hated him utterly, yet for her young child's sake, she swallowed her tears and endured. Last year, when Thuriai's army was crushed in Lucania and other women wailed for fallen husbands, Andrea shut her doors and wept with relief. She was finally free of that torment. Days later, the Lacanians stormed Amandalora and took everyone captive, including her. Lacanian warriors, struck by her beauty, brought her before Bagyul to curry favor with the tribal heir. Andrea, initially terrified by the rugged, non-Greek Bagyul, found herself cared for by him instead of harmed. He provided food and protection, eventually winning her heart with his steady, loving nature. She found true love with him, viewing their life together as an Elysian paradise compared to her past marriage. When Bagyul tearfully revealed his tribe's defeat and impending retreat to the mountains, Andrea agreed to follow him without hesitation. During the mercenaries' assault on Amandalura, Andrea watched Bagyul fall in battle. I, observing this, saw an opportunity for my assimilation policy. I refrained from mentioning the captives to the Senate, waiting for the citizens' anger to cool and for new family bonds to replace old grudges. I warned Andrea that without a new citizen husband, her property would be state-managed until she remarried or her son came of age. Andrea pleaded to donate her property to the state if I would ensure Bagyul's safety and humane treatment. I assured her that captives were being held, not killed, provided Bagyul had not sustained fatal injuries. Andrea insisted she saw him merely knocked unconscious and that he was awake when captured. I calmly promised to verify Bagyul's status and arrange a meeting if he were alive. Overjoyed, Andrea knelt before me, praising my mercy like that of the goddess Hera. I watched the soldiers, realizing the captives included women and children, which would help control the warriors. By encouraging marriages between my men and Lacanian women, I could accelerate my assimilation plan. Geogris nervously followed a woman named Dania to the census officer, Raphius. Raphius, recognizing Geogris from the Senate, explained Dania's situation and asked if he would marry her. Shy and overwhelmed, Geogris nodded after Dania whispered for him to accept. Geogris had been dragged to the matchmaking event by his men and stood in a corner until Dania approached him directly, choosing him as her husband. Stunned by her beauty and directness, Geogris agreed and was led away. Dania, twice married and 30, preferred honest, steady men over glib talkers. She had spotted Geogris's discomfort in the corner and decided he was the right choice. Dania's home was a spacious courtyard house on the hillside. Opening the door, Dania took Geogris's hand and declared the home his own. The word home deeply touched Geogris's lonely heart. Inside, Geogris marveled at the stone walls, the colonnaded courtyard, and the central pool with a marble statue. Dania insisted he rest while she prepared dinner. When Geogris offered to help, Dania insisted he bathe and rest, calling for her slave, Yabia. Yabia, a dark-skinned slave girl, appeared and was introduced to her new master. Yabia bowed respectfully, eyeing Geogris with curiosity. Dania ordered Yabia to prepare a hot bath and fresh clothes for him. Geogris felt flustered as he entered the wooden tub. Yabia's presence while washing him left the young man breathless. This was the life of a citizen. He felt a mix of nervousness and immense surprise. Over a simple dinner of bread and olives, Dania apologized for the meager rations provided by the state. Geogris comforted her, noting that I had requested aid from Tarentum and that the Lacanians had planted crops ready for harvest. Dania was heartened by the news. Geogris proudly mentioned that the decision came from the Senate meeting he had attended. Dania was impressed by his status, correcting him that it was their land to reclaim. That night, Dania initiated the inexperienced Geogris as similar romantic scenes unfolded across Amandalura. I and Calixitoia were assigned the former home of Archon Marcellus, along with his 2 orphaned children, Cynthia and Adoris. Calixitoia had already cleaned the house with slaves. I met the nervous children, noting that my young wife had already begun to earn their trust. Before I could speak, assists arrived to report that Bagyul had been brought to the side room. Weak and despairing, Bagyul lay on the floor, having given up on life. A deep voice echoed. "Is this the son of the Lacanian leader Wespa, the warrior Bagyul?" Another voice replied, "Yes, Archon. Why do you look like a dead dog?" The newcomer mocked. Bagyul remained motionless, not even blinking. "Andrea praised you as a warrior, yet you don't even dare look at me," the man continued. Bagyul opened his eyes to see a man younger than his guard. He was stunned to hear the man addressed as Archon. How is Andrea?" he asked, his voice raspy and weak with concern. I stopped mocking him and said earnestly, "She is well, but she keeps begging me to release you so you can be together." Bagyul's face twisted in agony. He rolled over, his chest heaving. Finally, he looked at me with teary eyes. "Release us? You would give us freedom? Think of your crimes in Amandalura," I sneered. "You slaughtered citizens, abused women, and forced the people into starvation. The population dropped from 1,500 to 500 in 6 months. The survivors want your blood. Do you think you can escape punishment? My words extinguished the hope in Bagul's eyes, leaving him lying stiff and despairing on the ground. However, I shifted. The new Archon for life of Amandalura, do not believe in revenge through slaughter. Your crimes must be repaid, but in a different way. Bagul looked up, desperate. What way? Your men will become state slaves of Amandalura, building roads and walls, farming and herding. In wartime, you will serve as auxiliaries, I stated. Bagul fell silent. This was how they had treated the locals, divine retribution. What about the women? They will also be state slaves, working in textiles and agriculture. As for the widows and young girls, my soldiers and new citizens will take them as wives, I emphasized. Bagul sat up, shocked. Not concubines. Wives, I confirmed. Serve as slaves for 5 years. If you escape or attack a citizen, I will execute 10 of your kin for every offense. I am serious. Bagul asked quietly. And after 5 years, you will become freemen. You may apply for citizenship or return home, though I doubt you will want to leave by then. Good behavior can even shorten your sentence, I said confidently. Bagul felt a surge of hope. He realized I was showing genuine goodwill by integrating them through marriage. I agree personally, but I must consult my father and the tribe. Do we sign an agreement? There are no agreements here, only promises, I scoffed. Bagul was stunned that his tribe's fate rested on mere words. The citizens want you dead. I am the only one holding them back. You have no leverage to demand a contract. Believe me, or go back to your cell until you die, I declared sternly. Bagul looked defeated. You are too young. Why should we trust you? Because I am the commander who defeated the coalition, and my soldiers trust my word. As Archon, the people trust me to keep Amandalura safe, I replied. Bagul bowed to my strength and sincerity. I will consult my people. If we agree, I hope you keep your word. I will. Eventually, the citizens who marry your women will be the ones demanding your freedom, I smiled. Bagul said nothing. Relying on women for freedom was a humiliation for a warrior, but they had lost the war. After Bagul left, I instructed assistants. Tomorrow, have Bagul select the women for marriage and dress them well. Tell Antonius and the other officers to encourage the single soldiers to petition the Senate to marry these Lacanian women. Will the soldiers want to marry these natives? Assistants asked. Spread rumors that Lacanian women are tall, fit, and hardworking. Is that true? Assistants wondered, knowing Greeks valued physical beauty. Of course. They live in the mountains and eat meat, making them taller and stronger than those who only eat grain, I explained. Assistants recalled the captives and nodded. Also, promised them priority in land distribution in Lucania once we conquer it, as they will be in-laws to the locals, I added, sweetening the deal. Assist was tempted but asked, why go through this trouble instead of just using them as slaves? I explained patiently, which is better, forcing them to work with a whip or having them work willingly? The latter, of course. I want them to become citizens of Amandalura, not slaves. That is how we grow strong. Imagine the Lacanians trembling before our spears, seeing soldiers who look like them and speak their language, yet wear Greek armor and eat Greek food. They will be demoralized. Assist pondered and said uncertainly, they might surrender. Exactly. Bagul and his men are examples that surrender brings prosperity, not abuse. We will treat them more equally and tolerantly than the Persians, granting them rights to bridge the gap between us. This is how Amandalura will rise. I spoke with passion, hoping to infect others with my political vision and break the narrow-minded city-state mentality. Assist was convinced. Lord Archon, your foresight is profound. ACI, I heard you didn't pick a wife. Interested in a Lacanian woman? Should I ask Bagul if he has sisters so you can become kin? I joked. Assist immediately recalled Bagul's fierce appearance and shook his head repeatedly. Seriously, if you marry a Lacanian, I might appoint you governor of Lucania once we conquer the region, I said, half-jokingly. Governor? Assist recalled the majestic Tissaphernes in Asia Minor. He didn't stop to consider that such a title only existed in Persia. As Assist left, I mused on creating a secretary position to formalize Assist's role and cultivate young, like-minded assistants. Calixitoya entered, announcing, Oliverus is here. I was puzzled by the late visit. Oliverus's voice boomed. Lord Archon, your house is huge. I'd be lost without a guide. That marble statue is exquisite. Look at those muscle contours. I glared. Get to the point, or I'll throw you out. Don't. I really need your help. Oliverus pleaded. What is it? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Oliverus grew bashful. I want you to help me. Propose to Maligi. Propose? I asked, stunned. Oliverus took a breath. I love Maligi's daughter, Mitra. Please help me propose. I realized the rumors from Matonis were true. I vaguely remembered Mitra as a petite, shy girl. Does she love you back? I asked. Of course. Oliverus replied. Does Maligi know? He doesn't. Her mother approves, but she doesn't make the decisions. In this era, men held the power. Seeing Oliverus's recent change in character, from a plunderer to a protector, I agreed. I will help, but your success depends on your behavior. Oliverus cheered and hugged me. I chuckled at being friend-zoned. The next day, single new citizens protested at the Senate, demanding the right to marry Lacanian women. The Senate, led by me, staged a debate and passed the resolution, allowing the marriage of former enemies. They also decreed that all Lacanian captives would become state slaves for life, though they were to be treated as valuable property, not harmed. I then proposed another motion. Cornelius grew tense, fearing my tradition-breaking ideas, though this one seemed reasonable. I had promised my slaves freedom after the war. With the Lacanian coalition defeated, the Senate unanimously agreed to free the 1,000 slaves returned from Thurii and the 300 who had fought alongside the mercenaries. However, my next proposal caused a stir. These freedmen could apply for citizenship. Sitalomboli objected. Slaves becoming citizens? Amandalura will be the laughingstock of Magna Graecia. Antonius countered. They are already free men. Every city-state has precedents for this, including our own acceptance of foreigners, even a Persian. Why not be tolerant to those who bled for us? The new citizens agreed, silencing the old guard. Amyntas shared how a slave saved his life in Persia. They are our brothers. Hirpulasi noted how the medical slaves worked tirelessly to save the wounded. Mersis praised his slaves' administrative skills in managing supplies. The motion passed. After a 2-year probationary period, learning Greek, and paying 200 drachma, they could become citizens. Military service could shorten this time. The senators didn't realize this, along with the Immigration Act, would become a landmark legal precedent for the Mediterranean. Some complained the 200 drachma fee was too high. Others argued it made citizenship more precious. The next day, it was revealed that Calixitoia and Mersis had prepaid the fees for 16 freedmen. Everyone realized the value of these men, skilled craftsmen, hardened soldiers, and experienced farmers. Unlike the Greeks, who focused on trade and herding, these Persians were experts in agriculture. The 300 freedmen were quickly snapped up by citizens, who even began looking toward Thurii for more labor. The Senate remained in session as Maligi returned from Tarentum. Maligi's mission had been difficult, but with Archytas' letter to his father Histiaves and some clever gift-giving, Tarentum's Senate became receptive to an alliance. Tarentum, eager to restore its prestige after past failures against Thurii, saw the alliance as a way to protect Heraclea and bolster their own influence. However, Maligi's request for significant material aid caused hesitation. Archytas returned the next day, praising the mercenaries' combat prowess and my leadership, convincing the Tarentine Senate that Amandalura was a valuable ally. They not only approved the aid, but increased it. As Maligi read the treaty, the old citizens were struck by the sight of a Persian citizen commanding such respect and securing such a deal. The list of aid, 100 tons of grain, 1,000 pounds of salted fish, armor, and linen, drew cheers. Amandalura's survival was secured. Maligi announced the first shipment would arrive tomorrow. I seized the moment. For his great service, I propose Maligi be made a senator. The motion passed with support from the new citizens and reluctant nods from the old. The Senate then appointed Cornelius and Antonius to lead a delegation to Tarentum to finalize the alliance. Maligi followed me out. Thank you for making me a citizen, an official, and a senator. Maligi said gratefully. I told you I wouldn't lie, I laughed. You always keep your word. Maligi replied. Remember, this was the Senate's reward for your contributions, I reminded him. Maligi whispered, The Senate? I only know that without you, I'd be nothing. I am forever loyal to you, Lord Davos. I smiled. You still have much to learn about life as a Greek citizen. I then asked, how is Tarentum? Maligi described a wealthy, bustling city with a massive port and high trade volume. I asked about the Messapi invasion. Maligi, now more military-minded, explained, the Messapi have retreated. They rely on cavalry and peltasts, avoiding direct clashes with Tarentum's hoplites. Tarentum can't catch them. Cavalry? Are there many? I asked sharply. I don't know, but the land south of Tarentum is flat grassland, perfect for their herds of horses and livestock. I realized that while northern Gauls relied on cavalry due to their vast plains, southern powers were primarily infantry-based. I mistakenly believed the Messapi were also infantry-focused and resolved to have Antonius investigate them in Tarentum. Note: the Messapi were indigenous people who migrated to Italy's heel from Illyria long before the Greek colonization era. I urged Maligi, Amyndalar's trade officer, to develop a plan to boost the city's stagnant trade and tax revenue to replenish the empty national treasury. Maligi eagerly accepted the challenge. I hesitated to bring up the marriage proposal, deciding to wait a few days until Maligi settled in. Maligi reported that 2 members of the Pythagorean school from Tarentum had arrived, claiming to have been invited by me. I asked their whereabouts, and Maligi guessed they were likely heading to my residence. I met the 2 Pythagoreans, Matachoris and Mintotikirsi, both under 30. I greeted them, noting their youth. Matachoris, offended, boasted of his superior calculation skills and questioned why he had been summoned to this remote city. I laughed, noting that I myself was a young Archon, so I could hardly look down on their youth. Matachoris was stunned. I passionately argued that their youth was an asset, a source of energy, ambition, and the courage to challenge conventions, which was vital for academic progress. Mintotikirsi watched in awe, while Matachoris sheepishly conceded that I had a point. I promised full support, offering them a free residence for living and teaching, free from restrictions as long as they obeyed the law. I encouraged them to surpass their peers in Tarentum and fulfill Pythagoras' legacy. Inspired, the 2 requested to be shown to their new home to rest before beginning their work. As they left, I overheard Matachoris praising me favorably compared to Tarentum. I chuckled as I heard Mintotikirsi hushed his companion. Calixioia emerged, expressing concern about the Pythagorean school's poor reputation for secrecy, impiety, and past conflicts with city councils. I dismissed her fears, noting that Greeks were not as religiously dogmatic as Egyptians. I added that their elitist testing made them unlikely to grow large enough to pose a political threat. Calixioia asked if I expected their support. I shrugged, noting that their support was irrelevant, but their expertise in philosophy, music, and their advocacy for gender equality would be beneficial. Calixioia was surprised. I confirmed it, citing Archytas, and suggested they would provide excellent accountants for her bank. Calixioia teased me about my earlier claim that they couldn't grow. I remained confident that the 2 youths would adapt their methods to succeed. On a fragrant, flower-filled morning, Amyndalar celebrated a mass wedding. Over 1,500 couples gathered in the square before a statue of Hera, brought from Metapontum, to witness their union. After a ritual dance and song, the high priestess of Hera addressed the crowd, emphasizing that a happy marriage was the foundation of a stable city-state. The priestess asked the men if they would protect and love their wives until death. I and the other men shouted, "I do." She then asked the women if they would manage the household and honor their husbands until death. Calixioia and the women replied, "I do." The priestess then invited the couples to kiss. As couples like me and Calixioia, Geogris and Dania, and Olivarus and Mitra kissed, Citolomboli protested the public display as a violation of Greek tradition. Scambras laughed, noting the Ephor was away and that he found the ceremony quite interesting. "A happy marriage is the bedrock of a stable city-state," Raphias remarked. Cornelius looked puzzled. "I've never seen this Hera ritual before." "The Archon likely planned it with the high priest last night," Protesilaus speculated. Anluokelisai, the envoy from Heraclea, smiled at the plaza. "Your Archon seems like an interesting young man." The high priest invoked Hera's blessing as priestesses sprinkled holy water and the newlyweds sang hymns. As the ceremony ended, firefighters playfully doused the crowd. Women shrieked and hid behind their husbands, who scrambled to grab the water jars. Protesilaus, amused, suddenly turned to run back. "Where are you going?" Tritodemos asked. "To get a water jar," Protesilaus shouted back. Realizing the fun, Tritodemos shouted, "Grab a few more." Scombros joined in, lamenting, "If only I weren't already married." Amandalora hasn't been this lively in ages, Raphaeus sighed. Sitalongbali stopped complaining, watching the rainbow form in the mist, and muttered, "Won't this happen every year now?" After the wedding, I met the envoys from Metapontum and Heraclea at the Senate. Since Amandalora was now allied with Tarentum, the talks were smooth. I proposed mutual aid, which the envoys accepted. After a busy afternoon, I returned home to find a guest waiting. A sharp-eyed envoy presented gifts, introducing himself. "I am Hierolysai, envoy of the strategos autocrator Dionysius of Syracuse." I was startled by the names Syracuse and Dionysius. In my past life, I only knew of Dionysius through this Sword of Damocles legend. I knew little of Syracuse beyond the Athenian expedition's failure, Plato's visit, and Archimedes' death. However, I now knew Syracuse was a powerhouse. It had led Magna Graecia and Sicily against Carthage and local tribes, acting as a hegemon under a tyranny. Dionysius had recently seized power again. I knew Dionysius was cunning, ruthless, and militarily capable, having used a plague to repel Carthage. I labeled the tyrant dangerous. Despite my inner caution, I greeted the envoy warmly. "A guest from Syracuse. Please sit." I asked, "What brings you here?" Hierolysai explained. "When news of your victory over the Lacanian coalition reached Sicily, Dionysius decided to hire you to fight the Carthaginians, the enemies of Greece." I feigned curiosity. "Generous pay?" "For Daric gold coins per soldier monthly, and 20 for you," Hierolysai replied. I feigned shock. "For coins? That's double our previous rate. Is Syracuse that wealthy?" "To hire a hero who fought in Persia and crushed the Lacanians is worth any price," Hierolysai insisted. I felt a surge of pride but replied regretfully, "We are no longer mercenaries. We are citizens of Amandalora." Hierolysai praised their swift recapture of the city, then pivoted. "Then I propose a new request. Lead the Amandalora army alongside Syracuse to drive Carthage out of Sicily. We will pay you well and provide supplies to help Amandalora recover." I gestured for him to continue. I asked, "Didn't you sign a truce with Carthage 2 years ago?" Hierolysai admitted the truce was due to a plague, but argued that Carthage still enslaved Greek cities like Selinus, Agrigento, Gela, and Camarina, threatening Syracuse itself. After a pause, I declined. "I am the Archon of Amandalora. My people are rebuilding their lives and need me here. I cannot abandon them to go to Sicily." Hierolysai sighed, "A pity. I hope we can cooperate in the future." I replied, "Please convey my thanks and apologies to Dionysius." I escorted Hierolysai out. At the gate, Hierolysai stopped. "Lord Davos, may I ask a personal question?" "Go ahead." Hierolysai asked me why I allowed Amandalora's citizens to vote on my stay instead of simply seizing the city after its original population was decimated. I wondered if the envoy was dissatisfied with Dionysius's own tyrannical, mercenary-backed rule in Syracuse. I replied that my mercenaries sought peace, not power. By following legal procedures to become citizens, they would ensure stability and avoid the resentment of the original population. Hierolysai, impressed, expressed his honor in knowing me. Empty, watching Hierolysai depart, I felt grave. Syracuse's impending war with Carthage meant Amandalora had to strengthen itself rapidly to survive the chaos. 2 days later, Dionysius mocked the idea of a mercenary leader becoming an Archon for life, asking Marges for his opinion. Marges, a former mercenary leader, argued that a commander should focus on battle and profit, not governance, which leads to failure and burdens the innocent. Dionysius agreed, lamenting the stress of his own position and mocking the mercenary's ambition. Hierolysai interjected that I was elected by the people, not a self-proclaimed tyrant. Dionysius glared at him with razor-sharp eyes. Realizing he had touched a nerve, Hierolysai fell silent in a cold sweat. Dionysius dismissed me as a clever but short-sighted youth. He asked Philistus about Amandalora's population. Philistus noted there were fewer than 4,000 citizens. Dionysius scoffed that this was smaller than a single Syracuse district. The court chuckled. Dionysius boasted that after defeating Carthage, he would grant me a real city to rule, though he doubted I would survive that long. He then turned to military preparations. Marges reported over 10,000 mercenaries, 40,000 citizen soldiers, 20,000 allied troops, and 2,000 cavalry, a force surpassing even Athens. Dionysius calmly asked his brother, Leptines, about the navy. Leptines, a loyal and honest man, confirmed they had 320 vessels, including 150 triremes. Dionysius demanded more ships and cavalry. He ordered Leptines to expedite shipbuilding, Marges to recruit Celtic cavalry, and Philistus to seek Thessalian cavalry from Sparta for a spring offensive against Gela. The men pledged their efforts. Dionysius urged Marges to outperform the small-time mercenary I am. Marges promised not to disappoint. Dionysius dismissed everyone except Philistus. Dionysius watched Hierolysai leave with suspicion. He asked Philistus if Hierolysai had changed. Philistus nervously defended his friend. Dionysius, feigning sentimentality about their past, suggested giving Hierolysai a vacation to study Egyptian history, effectively sidelining him. Dionysius offered a hollow reassurance. He then asked Philistus to invite Philoxenus to critique a poem, hoping to mend their strained relationship. Philistus joked about Dionysius's inability to manage a simple citizen. Dionysius laughed, denying he was a dictator. I and Philistus began reorganizing the city's military. With former mercenaries, freed slaves, and original citizens, the force totaled roughly 3,500 men. I established the legion structure, a 7,000-man force, currently smaller, led by a legate, me, divided into 7 1,000-man cohorts, each with 5 200-man centuries and 4 50-man platoons. Despite my preference for 100-man units, Philistus argued that 50-man platoons offered superior flexibility in rough terrain. I agreed, establishing the platoon leader, nicknamed Squad Boss, as a vital rank. Each platoon contained 5 10-man squads led by sergeants. The legion also included cavalry, engineering, medical, and baggage units. Currently, the 3,500 men were organized into 4 cohorts. Capys was appointed first cohort legate to balance power, as Antonius was already a magistrate. Empty Matones was elected century leader by the soldiers for his bravery and protectiveness. Dracos led the second cohort, with Sicida and Adrianx as century leaders. Hieronymus led the third cohort, composed of diverse troops, with Agathias as a century leader. Epitenes led the seventh, light infantry, cohort, with Zippite and Alpins as officers. Lades led the cavalry. I mandated color-coded helmet crests for officers. White for platoon leaders, red for century leaders, purple for cohort leaders, and a mix for the legate. Officers paid for these modifications themselves, recognizing their value in battle. Crests allowed soldiers to reorient themselves and messengers to locate commanders amidst the chaos of combat. Citizens and freedmen gathered in the square fully armed. Freedmen lacked funds for gear. They utilized weapons gifted by Thurii and thousands of pieces of equipment scavenged from the defeated Lacanian coalition. I proposed using the proceeds from selling surplus gear to fund a shop that repaired equipment and provided disability pensions for wounded soldiers. The troops were deeply moved by this gesture. The Legion shop opened, allowing freedmen to rent gear to earn their citizenship through service. Calixitoia Bank provided low-interest loans to help them afford these costs, marking its first major transaction. The troops formed into 3 orderly phalanxes. Philistus explained that the third cohort was slow due to the lack of training among the freedmen. I noted Hieronymus's struggle and his recruitment of veterans from the first cohort. Philistus defended Hieronymus's dedication. I expressed confidence in their progress. I asked about the Lacanians. Philistus pointed to 800 to 900 of them watching from a hill, fearing rebellion. I dismissed the threat, noting the soldiers could easily crush them and that the Lacanian women were now married to my men. I ordered the drums to sound. The synchronized marching of the phalanxes shook the earth, stunning the original citizens and intimidating the watching Lacanians, while the families cheered. I signaled for the march to stop. A drummer struck his instrument twice, silencing the square instantly. When a freeman coughed, a veteran sergeant glared him into silence. I stepped forward. Brothers! The crowd roared my name. Have you enjoyed your recent comfort? Yes. I feared you'd grown soft and couldn't wield your spears. The soldiers laughed heartily. Many of you conquered Persia and defeated the Lacanian tribal coalition. You are now citizens of Amandalara. From here on, you shall protect, develop, and expand this city to create an immortal legacy for your descendants. I declared passionately. The soldiers waved their spears, chanting victory in unison. Sita Longbali watched Antichrist, who was cheering with his only remaining hand, and mocked. You aren't a soldier. Why are you so excited? This is a real army. The one Amandalara has craved. Antichrist replied, his gaze falling to his amputated arm. It's a pity I can no longer fight alongside them. Sita Longbali, an old neighbor, softened his tone. Didn't you hate these outsiders for taking your position as patrol captain? That was just anger. Silas is humble and often asks for my advice, Antichrist replied. Besides, my 2 new sons-in-law are new citizens. Look, that tall man in the white helmet is my eldest son-in-law, a squad leader. A squad leader? Back in our day, we were both cohort captains, Sita Longbali scoffed. It's different now. We were appointed by birth, but I require squad leaders to be battle-hardened and elected by their peers. They must earn the respect of their experienced, proud subordinates, Antichrist said proudly. Sita Longbali fell silent. He couldn't deny the prowess of the Persian expeditionary force. Calixichoya watched me, her husband, with admiration. Her choice had been correct. I was fulfilling my ideals. The Archon is impressive, Andrea whispered. Calixichoya had hired her at the bank to help her heal from her past, and they had become close friends. Are you smitten with me? Calixichoya teased. Andrea blushed and denied it. I heard I invited the Lacanians to watch. I'll arrange a meeting for you after the ceremony, Calixichoya promised. Andrea thanked her. Are you really going to wait 5 years for him? Calixichoya asked. Andrea nodded firmly. Then urge Bagyal to keep his people in line and serve the city well, Calixichoya advised. If they contribute enough, perhaps the 5-year term can be shortened. Andrea nodded solemnly. Calixichoya stroked her face. I truly hope your wait is short and your wish comes true. Andrea bit her lip, on the verge of tears. Military officer Felicius stepped forward. On behalf of the Senate, I announced the formation of the 1st Legion, led by Archon for life, me. The crowd erupted in cheers as the trumpets signaled the presentation of the legionary standard. Felicius presented a 4-meter-long flag. I accepted it respectfully and circled the platform. Mercis shouted from the sidelines, Look, I spent days designing and overseeing that. Maligi looked skeptical. Mercis laughed. Fine, I designed it, but I ensured it was finished on time. The soldiers gazed at the golden standard, topped with a brass statue of Hades holding a bident. The red fabric was embroidered with 1st Legion, in gold, featuring a single gold star. I pointed to it. This star represents your victory over the Lacanian tribal coalition, a unique honor for the founders of our new legion. The soldiers cheered, eyes filled with pride. Every major victory will earn another star, I declared. I hope to see this flag covered in them. The soldiers roared, Victory! The morale in the square reached its peak. In all my decades of service, I've never seen such a flag or such a way to inspire troops, Antichrist remarked with longing. The Hades statue implies I claim the favor of the underworld, Sita Longbali muttered. Many believe it's true, Antichrist countered. Hades is on our side, bringing death to our enemies. It's a good thing. I only wish I could fight under that banner. Felicius shouted, Standard-bearer Marcius, come forward to receive the flag. Marcius, the usually bold captain of the guard, adjusted his armor and helmet with solemn nerves. He stepped onto the platform, stood before me, and struck his chest in a sharp military salute. I returned the salute, declaring, The Legion's standard-bearer is the bravest soldier, a position of supreme honor. Carry this flag forward through any danger to inspire our victory. Accepting the standard, Marcius swore, By Hades, I shall cherish this flag as my own eyes, always advancing and never retreating. Amidst the cheers, Matones muttered, If I hadn't become a centurion, that flag would be mine. Next, Captain Kapuz of the 1st Battalion, come forward to receive your battalion standard. Before Kapuz could move, his soldiers urged him on. Hurry, Captain, go get the flag. Kapuz walked onto the platform with measured steps. I handed him the standard, saying, the 1st Battalion is the pride of the Legion. Where the danger is greatest, you must lead the way to victory. Remember this. The 1st Battalion will not fail you, Archon. We shall always be the Legion's sharpest spear. Kapuz replied firmly. He examined the standard, topped with an iron statue of Thanatos, the god of death, and inscribed with 1st Legion, 1st Battalion. As he waved it, his men erupted in cheers. Dracos, the 2nd Battalion captain, followed. Despite his bandages, he appeared fully armed, drawing encouraging cheers from his men as he limped forward. I asked with concern, Dracos, are you well? The doctors say I am fine, Dracos replied, looking at his former rival with newfound respect. Thank you for your concern, Archon. Your men fought bravely against the Lacanian coalition, but you still lag behind the 1st Battalion. Train them strictly according to military law to close the gap, I urged. Rest assured, Archon, the 2nd Battalion will yield to no one. Dracos vowed. When Hieronymus of the 3rd Battalion stepped up, I said nothing, knowing the man's relentless drive for training. Epitenes, the 7th Battalion captain, requested, my battalion is short 400 men. May I recruit peltasts, archers, and slingers from Thrace, Crete, and Rhodes? As freemen in Amendalara? I asked with a knowing smile. Initially as freemen, then applying for citizenship per your Senate proposal, Epitenes chuckled. I welcomed the initiative, but offered a warning. You must submit a proposal to the Senate for these newcomers. I will support it, but the path to citizenship will be difficult. Also, operate discreetly in the Eastern Mediterranean. Do not provoke the Spartans. Understood. Epitenes replied excitedly. The ceremony continued with the presentation of company and platoon flags, topped with iron statues of the Erinyes and Cerberus. The square remained filled with high morale and constant cheering for 2 hours. Finally, I raised the Legion's standard, joined by the flags of every battalion, company, and platoon. The flag stands, the unit stands. Where the flag points, we are invincible. The soldiers roared back. The flag stands, the unit stands. Where the flag points, we are invincible. Most Lacanians present could not understand the words, but the sheer, thunderous pressure of the chant left them terrified. Weisaba and his son Bagul understood, and they fell into a long, heavy silence. Weisaba sighed. Son, remember the wolf packs in the mountains? When a lone wolf joins a powerful pack, is it cowardice? No, father. It is wisdom. Only under a strong leader can they survive and thrive. The proud ones die alone or become prey, Bagul replied, comforting his father. Weisaba nodded, his decision made. I have seen many Greek armies, but none like this. Amendalara is small, but this Archon has grand ambitions. Since we cannot defeat them, we must choose the path that ensures our survival. The next day, Trade Officer Maligi met with me. Archon, Amendalara is small, poor, and lacks support. It is difficult to attract foreign merchants through traditional means. I agreed. The city had stagnated at 4,000 citizens for 2 centuries because it could not support more. I waited for Maligi's solution. However, Maligi continued. Our neighbors like Thurii and Heraclea have busy ports, but they are plagued by issues: lack of storage, spoiled goods, high prices for travelers, and slow, biased dispute resolution. I have studied their failures. I listened intently. I knew the power of trade and currency, much like Athens had used its silver coins to dominate the Delian League. I respected Maligi's insight. Thurii and Heraclea are close, Maligi proposed. We can build warehouses between the Burano and Cisno rivers with low rent, plus affordable inns and markets. By offering superior service and fair treatment, we will attract merchants and sailors, turning Amendalara into a thriving trade hub. I applauded. Excellent, Maligi. You are the perfect trade officer. Cyrus the Younger truly wasted your talents in media. Maligi spoke of Cyrus the Younger with a somber tone, noting that Cyrus preferred soldiers and farmers over merchants, valuing those who could best cultivate the land and those who could best defend it. I reflected that in vast Persia, farmers and herdsmen were the foundation of stability. I lamented that Cyrus, despite his potential to be a great king, failed to realize that his life belonged to his people, ultimately risking it all in battle. Maliji sighed in agreement. I approved of Maliji's commercial plans and offered my own insights, as Maliji knew my talent for trade had already brought life to the Thurii market. I proposed building a wide, durable road with sturdy bridges between Amandalara, Thurii, and Heraclea to facilitate trade. I also tasked Maliji with coordinating with Silas to ensure warehouses and inns were clean, safe, and affordable. I then inquired about the current tariffs in neighboring city-states. Maliji explained that essential goods were taxed at a low 2%, while non-essential or competing foreign goods faced steep tariffs of 20% to 30%. Empty. I realized the ancient Greeks were well-versed in economic protectionism. I decided to undercut the competition. By slashing tariffs to 1% for essentials and 10% for others, I aimed to attract traders to Amandalara, stimulating the local economy and creating opportunities for my citizens. Maliji was pleased but warned that while Heraclea and Metapontum were allies, Thurii might obstruct merchants who used Amandalara as a transit point. I stroked my chin, troubled by this obstacle. Relations with Thurii had soured. Despite me saving them, the Thurians felt slighted by the mercenaries' deception and the newfound arrogance of the Amandalara citizens, who held deep-seated grudges against their former masters. This stalemate hindered my diplomatic and strategic goals, threatening my promises to the Senate. I realized I couldn't expand into Lacanian territory easily. Heraclea was an ally backed by Tarentum, and attacking Thurii, a former ally, would provoke the ire of all Magna Graecia. The only viable path to Lucania was through the rugged, wild terrain to the west. Bagul confirmed that the western route was a death trap of dense forests and swamps. His own tribe had lost over half their numbers traversing it. To avoid such losses, they needed to pass through the Sybaris Plain, which required mending relations with Thurii. I resolved to propose a diplomatic thaw at the Senate meeting that afternoon, prioritizing economic and military necessity over lingering resentment. Maliji noted that the Senate would surely follow my lead, though I remained cautious about the feelings of veteran senators like Cornelius regarding the unity of the citizens. Maliji suggested opening a large hospital in Amandalara. He noted that their medical corps had been so popular in Thurii that patients had begged them not to leave. I, realizing the potential for medical tourism, exclaimed that we should build a full-scale hospital. A hospital? Maliji asked. I explained that a hospital would provide inpatient care, medical research, and training for young doctors, attracting patients from across the region. Maliji was stunned by the innovative concept, calling it a divine idea. I noted that progress would be gradual, joking that I was already behind on my medical lectures for Herculosi. Maliji left, feeling more convinced than ever that I was a man of extraordinary, God-given talents. I then considered turning Amandalara into a center for entertainment as well. I headed to the side room. Calixioya was there, discussing loans with accountants and overseeing the new slaves purchased from Tarentum, including Asuna, an intelligent Egyptian woman she had taken under her wing. Asuna greeted me respectfully. The others bowed, while the new slaves remained confused. I asked if the leather worker had been purchased. Calixioya complained that the skilled worker cost as much as 4 or 5 ordinary slaves. I insisted that the long-term trade value of a skilled artisan far outweighed the initial cost. Calixioya teased me as a great merchant and pointed out the man. I approached the thin, elderly man, who identified himself as Tarikas from Ephesus, enslaved due to debt. Tarikas confirmed his origin and status. I promised that if his craftsmanship was good, he could earn his freedom. Tarikas, having lost his family, expressed a desire to stay until his death. I agreed and took him to the courtyard to draw a pattern in the dirt. It was a rugby ball made of cowhide, a concept that left Tarikas bewildered. That afternoon, my proposal to improve relations with Thurii faced fierce opposition from Sitalomboli and other veteran senators. I argued passionately, urging them to set aside personal grievances for the sake of the city-state's prosperity, security, and future, reminding them that while individuals have grudges, city-states have only eternal interests. My words moved the senators, including Cornelius, into silent contemplation. Scombros protested, arguing that they couldn't simply forget the suffering Thurii had caused them. I clarified that I wasn't asking them to forget, but to use Thurii to grow stronger until they could eventually settle the score. Scombros's anger subsided slightly at this logic. The proposal passed with only Sitalongbali dissenting and 2 abstentions. I immediately sent word to Burkos and Thurii that Amendalara was open to reconciliation. The Thurian generals, desperate for a diplomatic breakthrough, sent a delegation led by Cunegurata, Niansis, and Ansitanos. I insisted on a reciprocal delegation, stipulating that the Thurians must not cross the Saraceno River, meeting instead on the south bank. The Thurians were disappointed by the restriction, but accepted. The 2 sides met at the riverbank the following morning. The Thurians were wary of me, the young, brilliant hero who had annihilated the Lacanian coalition and now held absolute power in Amendalara. Cunegurata, who had once treated me as an inexperienced youth, felt a chill at my calm, humble demeanor, recognizing the terrifying capability behind it. Ansitanos simply hoped to hear stories of their Persian campaign. They sat beneath a large leather tent. Cunegurata spoke emotionally of the shared tragedy of the war, mourning the thousands lost on both sides. I was caught off guard, but Scombros interrupted, mocking the Thurians for their acting and demanding they get to the point. Cunegurata ignored the outburst, praising me as a hero who had saved both cities, a sentiment echoed by his fellow generals. Cunegurata sincerely invited me to visit Thurii. Scombros again intervened, stating that as Archon for life, my travel required Senate approval. Cunegurata expressed disappointment and offered Thurii's full support for Amendalara's reconstruction. Scombros loudly rejected the offer, fearing a hidden cost. Cunegurata, ignoring Scombros, asked me directly who was in charge. I smiled and initiated the formal negotiations, my calm authority causing the Thurians to tense up. Ansitanos opened. Thurii and Amendalara have been allies for 41 years. The current treaty remains valid. We should maintain our alliance. Sitalongbali tried to speak, but Cornelius silenced him with a stern shake of his head. Sitalongbali spat on the ground in frustration. Antonius stated, Amendalara agrees to renew the alliance, but on one condition. It must not harm Tarentum's interests. If war breaks out between Tarentum and Thurii, Amendalara will side with Tarentum. The Thurian delegation erupted in an uproar. Niansis stood up, shouting, You violate your oaths. Our treaty never ended. Your secret dealings with Tarentum are a breach. We overlooked this out of friendship, yet you repay us with this shameless demand. I retorted sharply. Thurii broke its oath first by failing to send aid when Amendalara fell to the Lacanians. The old Amendalara died that day. The new one owes you nothing. You failed us, while Tarentum provided the help we desperately needed. We owe our loyalty to them, not to the city that let our people be imprisoned. Sitalongbali roared. I told you not to ally with these selfish Thurians. I'm glad they're unhappy. If they want to teach us a lesson, our spears are ready. Many in the Thurian delegation were visibly shaken. Cunegurata requested a private discussion for the Thurians to reach a decision. I agreed. As the Thurians retreated, I gave Sitalongbali a thumbs up, while said, Lord Sitalongbali. I spoke the truth, Sitalongbali grunted. I laughed. That is exactly what I wanted. Sitalongbali smiled, satisfied. Cunegurata told his group, Amendalara has clearly secured Tarentum's backing. If we refuse their condition, the negotiations will collapse. Niansis fumed. Then let them collapse. The Lacanian threat is gone. We don't need this abuse. I thought Tarentum was sincere, but they are playing us. Ansitanos sighed. We are a defeated city. We have no leverage. Croton is eyeing the old Cyberus site, and we are vulnerable. If the Lacanians return, we need Amendalara's help. The others fell into a somber silence. Cunegurata analyzed. Tarentum likely has no ambition to conquer us. They want to lead the Great Greece Defense Alliance. They are merely exacting revenge for our past victories. We must endure this humiliation, rebuild, and rise again, just as our ancestors did. Inspired by Cunegurata, the Thurians returned to the table and readily accepted the condition. I noted the influence of the somber-looking old man. Antonius stood. In April, your Archon signed a 6-month contract for us to defend Thurii against the Lacanians. The contract requires payment and grain regardless of whether the task is completed early. He handed the scroll to Ansetanos. The mercenaries are to be paid and fed until the term expires. Cunigarata nodded, but Neansis interrupted. Thurii will not honor this contract. The Thurians were stunned. They had previously agreed to honor it to maintain security during their recovery, but Neansis had unilaterally reversed his position. Neansis stammered. The contract was with mercenaries who are now Amandalaris citizens, changing the legal status. Furthermore, it was signed only by General Fears, who is now dead. The other generals opposed it. Sidalombali cursed the Thurians for their lack of honor and their slander against the dead. I signaled Maligi, who stood and said, "We agree to cancel the contract, not because of your excuses, but because we do not wish to burden the suffering people of Thurii with extra taxes. We remain allies." The Amandalara delegation's solemnity made the Thurians feel deeply ashamed. Cunigarata glared at Neansis, who felt no pride in his victory. Maligi continued, proposing trade cooperation to resolve Thurii's internal tensions. Guilt-ridden, the Thurians agreed. The port was overcrowded with freemen who had been promised citizenship for fighting, a promise the council had reneged on, claiming the freemen had retreated during the battle. Tensions were high in the port. Amandalara's offer to build warehouses and inns would help disperse the crowds and mitigate the threat of riots. The alliance was agreed upon in principle, pending review by Tarentum's Senate to ensure their interests were protected. The Thurians, stripped of their anger, nodded in resignation. On the return journey, Cunigarata rode far ahead, leaving Neansis terrified. Neansis realized he had overstepped by changing the agreed-upon strategy, and he feared the wrath of his mentor. Cunigarata was indeed furious. He had realized his political maneuvers were useless in war and that Thurii was weak. He had wanted to maintain the contract to keep me close, but Neansis had ruined it. Cunigarata fumed. That fool doesn't understand that a contract binds them better than a vague alliance. He must be removed from the council. Ansetanos, preoccupied with his own agenda, remained oblivious to the tension between the two generals. Back home, I pondered a critical issue. I summoned assists. With the alliance nearing completion, we must prepare for our Lacanian strategy. We need intelligence, but we cannot send Greeks. Do you have any suggestions? Assist smiled. I have someone in mind. Who? Izum. I recalled the young Dukian who had joined my mercenaries, a clever youth with a talent for languages. Does he resemble a Lacanian? I asked. Yes, Assist replied. He is similar in build, and he is married to a Lacanian woman, so he knows their language and customs. I teased. So you really married a Lacanian girl, Bagul's sister? Assist blushed, mumbling that she was all right. I laughed. If Wyzaba chose her, she must be beautiful. Bagul is just the exception. I continued. Your brother-in-law is quite the figure. He has the most beautiful woman in Amandalara waiting 5 years for him. I advised, learn from your wife, Assists. One day, I may send you to Lucania. Assists asked doubtfully. Can we really take Lucania? They have over 100 tribes and thousands of people. With careful planning, anything is possible, I encouraged. I ordered Assists to fetch Izum. Wait, I added. I have another task. I need an intelligence network to monitor the neighboring city-states, Tarentum, Thurii, Heraclea, and Croton. You will organize this. I will provide the funds and manpower. Understood, Lord Davos. Assist replied without hesitation. Seeing my enthusiasm, I warned him. Intelligence gathering is tedious and requires extreme patience and precision. Since you are inexperienced, start by focusing only on Thurii. I then shared principles and techniques I recalled from my past life. Assist listened and took notes intently. He was thrilled. This was his first independent assignment, far more significant and interesting than his previous duties as a mere herald. Izum and his Lacanian wife were working in the fields. As a Dukya Highlander, Izum didn't share the Greek taboo against wives working outdoors. He was delighted that his new bride wanted to help. In Dukya, women often hunted or fought when manpower was scarce. Her willingness to work signaled her integration into their new home. Despite the strange looks from passing citizens, He remained in high spirits, chattering to her in broken Lacanian. Because Izam joined the mercenaries late, his land was poor, 5 acres near the rocky hills, far from the river. However, thanks to the money his father, King Malo, had given him when he left, he had purchased 3 slaves from Tarentum, 2 Egyptians for farming and 1 Greek for herding. His proximity to the hills made grazing convenient, though my Senate-approved laws strictly regulated tree felling. Without the low-interest loans from Calixichoya's bank, many of his comrades would have been destitute. Though inexperienced with farming, Izam learned humbly from his Egyptian slaves. His wife weeded the wheat, 1 slave fetched water from the Sini River, and the Greek slave tended the livestock on the slopes. Empty, when assists arrived, the couple was covered in dust. Recognizing my secretary, Izam immediately dropped his tools to greet him. Assist chuckled at the unconventional document. Why work so hard, Izam? You even brought your wife. Military training starts in 2 days, and it's said to be grueling. The Archon also promised a fun game afterward. I must finish my chores to focus on training, Izam replied, wiping sweat with his tunic. Assist joked, not bad. You look more like a Greek farmer than we do. Izam laughed, taking it as a compliment, though he complained about the difficulty of hauling water. Assist whispered proudly, I heard Lord Davos has Alexis gathering carpenters to build a water wheel to pump Sini River water directly to high-altitude fields like yours. A magical device? What does it look like? Izam asked curiously. Like a wheel, I think. Ask Lord Davos yourself. Assist shrugged. I wouldn't dare, Izam said with awe. Having served as a guide, he had watched my rise with growing reverence. Rumors that I was God-favored, or even Hades' bloodline, had solidified his loyalty. He had followed me to Magna Graecia without hesitation, believing in the Son of God. You have your chance. Lord Davos wants to see you. Assist smiled. Really? Izam gasped. Of course. With a cheer, Izam shouted to his wife in Lacanian and sprinted toward the city of Amendalara. Izam, we meet again. How is your new life? Do you miss home? I asked warmly. My kindness eased Izam's nerves. After hearing his story, I remarked, you see, Greeks, Dukians, and Lacanians can live together like one family. Yes, Archon. Izam emboldened himself to add, many teammates who married Lacanian women say they are excellent wives. They are learning Greek and working hard, and they are very passionate. I laughed. Indeed, our Greek women are too conservative. We should encourage this exchange. Emboldened, Izam added, but these women miss their families. They hope their relatives will be freed. I remained calm. Rest assured, we treat them well. If they keep their word, they will earn their freedom early. Tell your wife to inform the others that the city will arrange meetings soon. I will, Archon, Izam nodded. I have a mission for you, I said, my tone turning serious. We need intelligence on Lucania. Assist recommended you. I accept, Izam replied instantly. I warned him of the extreme danger, but Izam was resolute. He preferred the freedom of the wild to the rigid discipline of the camp. I am certain. Just give me time to prepare. Take your time. If you return successfully, I will form a mountain scout squad and appoint you captain. Calixichoya will also look after your family while you are away. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Izam vowed. I will return with the intelligence, Archon. Keep that captain's position for me. Good. I was pleased. I had been planning this unit, as the rugged Apennine terrain limited cavalry, but a specialized mountain scout team would be invaluable. Bagul was leading his tribesmen in building warehouses and inns, divided into teams for logging, stone cutting, and foundation laying. Local craftsmen supervised the Lacanian slaves. Alexis and Heraclides were on site, reviewing blueprints. Heraclides, a former apprentice to the legendary Hippodamus, had fallen on hard times after being expelled from Athens during the political turmoil surrounding Pericles. After 20 years of poverty and struggle in the Greek world, he had arrived in Thurii, only to be rejected as a citizen. He had spent 2 decades as a destitute freeman, his wife dead, worrying about his son's future, until a stranger offered him employment in Amendalara. Are you Heraclides? Yes. I heard you were Hippodamus's apprentice. I never lie. Will you work for Amendalara? 50 drachmae a month. What is the project? The overseer Alexis will explain. If you perform well, he will recommend you for citizenship under Lord Davos. The crowd behind him gasped in envy. Note: Hippodamus was a famous architect and friend of Pericles. Empty. News of Amyndolere's prosperity, the defeat of the Lacanians, the enfranchisement of mercenaries and slaves, had stirred the stagnant waters of Thurii. Heraclides, skeptical but desperate, was moved by the promise of a new life. "Can I bring my son? He is as talented as I am." Heraclides asked eagerly. Of course. Upon meeting Alexis, Heraclides was told, "I am the construction overseer. Amyndolere values engineering above all else. If you have talent, you will be rewarded." Heraclides felt his long-dormant passion for building reignite. His first task, the warehouses and inns, was approved by the Senate, and construction began with 1,000 Lacanian slaves. Heraclides was meticulous, personally supervising every detail and correcting errors, earning both fear and respect from the workers. Today, Alexis handed him a new scroll. Design a road from the Cini River to the Saraceno River, following the Archon's plans. "Your Archon knows everything, does he?" Heraclides muttered, his professional pride stung. "Look at the plans first," Alexis advised. Remembering that his citizenship depended on me, Heraclides swallowed his pride. Survival triumphed over arrogance. He glanced at the scroll, and his eyes widened in shock. Alexis looked around the bustling site, energized. "Can this be finished in 6 months?" 6 months? 4 is enough. 3. If these Lacanians were smarter. Heraclides replied, still staring at the plans. "Not satisfied with the labor?" Alexis laughed. "They know nothing. I've shouted until I'm hoarse. Can I have a new batch?" "That is impossible. They aren't as scary as I thought. Perhaps they fear you more than they fear the wild." Heraclides mused. "It's not fear, it's Lord Davos's methods," Alexis corrected. Heraclides pointed to the scroll, his tone now one of genuine admiration. "The road design is complex. Compacted earth, sand, gravel, and stone slabs, with drainage ditches and retaining walls. It's durable and resilient. I've never seen such a design. If your Archon thought of this, he is a master architect." Alexis, used to my miracles, asked, "So, you agree to follow the plan?" "Of course. I must see this built." The old man then pointed to a detail. "We know mortar is lime, water, and sand. But this calls for volcanic ash. The Archon calls it cement. Does it actually work?" Alexis solemnly stated, "The citizens of Amyndolere know Archon Diffusi is favored by Hades. This is surely another revelation from the Lord of the Underworld. Once you try it, you will understand its wonders." "You're right, why not try?" Heraclides replied, intrigued. "I recall Sicily and its surrounding islands have many volcanoes, said to be where Hephaestus once forged divine weapons. We could send a ship to fetch volcanic ash. It shouldn't cost much." Alexis turned serious. "Because of your and your son's contributions, Archon Diffusi proposed a motion, approved by the Amyndolere Senate, granting you and little Heraclides the status of reserve citizens. After a 2-year probationary period of continued service, you will become formal citizens. Congratulations." Heraclides froze, his dry lips trembling. Unable to speak, tears welled up and streamed down his face. Touched, Alexis softened his tone. "As reserve citizens, know that Archon Diffusi has strictly ordered. The method for making cement is the highest secret of Amyndolere. Only you and your son may know. Any leak will bring the F-ers to hold you accountable with severe punishment. Find a way to use it while keeping it secret." Heraclides nervously tucked the blueprints into his tunic. 18-year-old Arsenes was attending his second military training. Orphaned by the war between Thurii and the Lacanians, he had inherited his family's estate and was driven to master combat to avenge his parents. Under the City-State Military Service Act, adult citizens trained every 6 days during busy seasons and every 3 days during the off-season. Arsenes found the training grueling and monotonous, save for the rugby game taught by the Archon. The second training session mirrored the first. Full gear, Corinthian helmet, linothorax, bronze greaves, shield, spear, and sword, followed by a 5-kilometer march. Despite the 40-pound load, Arsenes handled it well, unlike the freemen recruits who suffered under the instructors' canes. Empty, instructors emphasized that since combat is brief, a well-trained citizen soldier must first master marching and camping. Trusting his centurion, a renowned warrior, Arsenies focused on controlling his pace and breathing to conserve energy. Passing Lacanian slaves hauling timber, Arsenies suppressed his urge to lash out. He now understood they were state property. Harming them was a waste, and true strength meant defeating enemies on the battlefield, not abusing captives. After the march, recruits practiced charging in phalanx formation. They moved from a walk to a run, navigating trenches and mounds while maintaining tight formation. The constant shouting of instructors and the physical toll left the recruits gasping on the ground before being driven to the Cisno River. Swimming was a favorite, as Amandala's river-rich terrain made it a common skill. Arsenies and his peers enjoyed the cool water, watching older veterans from landlocked regions like Thessaly struggle to learn. Arsenies recalled the instructor's warning. In Persia, soldiers who couldn't swim drowned while crossing rivers under fire. Versatility was essential for survival. A roar of cheers interrupted his thoughts. "What's happening?" he asked a teammate. "The Archon is swimming," replied Melisanda, a 16-year-old friend and orphan whose stepfather was the military officer Felicius. Though underage, he had gained special permission to train. "The Archon is here?" Arsenies asked in surprise. Diffusi leads by example, the instructor noted. He trains with the veterans often. Arsenies and Melisanda rushed downstream. They saw 5 men racing. Diffusi, using an efficient, fish-like stroke they had never seen, surged ahead of the others. Diffusi stood in the waist-deep water and challenged others to race. The cheering soldiers fell silent. Melisanda shoved Arsenies forward. Caught off guard, Arsenies shouted, I'll race." The soldiers murmured in disappointment. "It's just a kid." "What's wrong with being a kid? The Archon is only a few years older than us," Melisanda retorted. Diffusi smiled at Melisanda, then turned to Arsenies. "The brave are often young." Arsenies approached the Archon. Diffusi was of medium height, well-built, with sharp, piercing eyes currently softened by a smile. "A new recruit?" Diffusi asked. "Yes, Archon. I am Arsenies, son of Alajalasi. I may not be as fast, but I accept the challenge." Diffusi praised his courage, calling it the spirit Amandala's soldiers must possess. The soldiers erupted in cheers of victory. Encouraged, Arsenies felt a surge of strength. He lost the race, but it didn't matter. Diffusi patted his shoulder. "Train hard, and you will become a warrior." Arsenies nodded, feeling as though he had been addressed by a respected elder. "Who is your instructor?" Diffusi asked. "Matones." Diffusi chuckled. "He is protective but demanding, especially with you." Diffusi then promised to add his swimming technique to the military law for all to learn. Merged into 4272, at noon, Diffusi provided a meat-based mutton soup to supplement their rations, funded by the Disabled Veterans Foundation. Merged into 4274, over soup, Arsenies remarked that the Archon seemed approachable, contrary to rumors of him being a dictator. Melisanda dismissed the critics as jealous. "He has the ability. Look at how Amandala has prospered since he took charge." "You're right," Arsenies agreed, noting Melisanda's improved relationship with his stepfather. Melisanda admitted, "He's good to my mother and me, though I wish he had more of the instructor's grit." "Empty," Arsenies teased him, mimicking Matones' harsh training commands. Melisanda threatened to tell the instructor, silencing Arsenies. Arsenies asked, "Are we really going to attack Lacania?" "We aren't training this hard just for defense," Melisanda replied. Arsenies dreamed of conquering land and perhaps taking a Lacanian wife. "Too early for that," Melisanda laughed. "I'm alone, unlike you," Arsenies said quietly. "Then let's master our skills and conquer together," Melisanda encouraged. They shook hands, united in purpose. Afternoon training resumed quickly. They practiced combat in groups of 3, using heavy wooden poles instead of spears. Arsenies noticed his pole was heavier and his partners were stronger, questioning the change. Matones replied sternly, "To be a warrior, you must train harder." Arsenies accepted the challenge silently. They practiced coordinated attacks, striking shields and thrusting at targets, with the instructor demanding precision and speed. They switched to shorter poles, requiring more force to break through enemy lines. Finally, they attacked wooden dummies, practicing strikes to the head, ribs, and legs until exhausted. Matones praised their progress. You've improved. Have you been practicing at home? Yes, they replied weakly. Good. You are becoming true hoplites. Now, join the veterans for formation training. As they switched back to their real spears, they felt light as feathers. Arsenis realized the wisdom in the instructor's method. Training with heavier gear made the real weapons feel effortless in battle. Arsenis recalled his father's infrequent, simple citizen-soldier training. In contrast, his current drills were rigorous, complex, and progressive, much like learning to read. He realized these systematic methods, authored by Archon Lord Diffusi in the new military law, were the secret behind the veterans' victory over the Lacanian allied army. Arsenis rushed to find his unit, the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Century, unable to say goodbye to Melisanda. Instructor Matones had described his new centurion, Geogris, as a former tentmate with a gentle temperament. Hoping Geogris was less severe than Matones, Arsenis navigated the dust-filled training ground. Amidst thousands of soldiers, he anxiously searched for his unit's red standard until he finally identified it by its number. Squad leader Teloadadaisai scolded him. Soldier, you're late. I'll spare you this time, but don't let it happen again. Arsenis apologized and quickly took his place. A man around 30 approached him warmly. I'm Kepis, your sergeant. Arsenis saluted. Greetings, sergeant. Kepis sized him up. A sturdy lad. Are you a recruit? Yes, Arsenis replied. An original citizen of Amendalara? Yes. I thought so. Who trained you? Matones. What? That madman. You know him? Kepis sighed. I was in his unit, but the 3rd Battalion demanded me for the reorganization. Matones didn't want to let me go, but Geogris is his friend. It's fate. In truth, Matones had simply wanted to get rid of the talkative Kepis. Don't worry, I'll look after you. Kepis promised. Thank you, Sergeant. Arsenis said gratefully, just as Teloadadaisai shouted. Kepis, prepare for training, stop talking. Understood. Kepis muttered. You're only a squad leader because you're lucky. If I'd followed Lord Diffusi from the start, I'd be a centurion by now. Arsenis felt uneasy, though a nearby soldier whispered that their sergeant was a good man despite his chatter. Arsenis hoped so. Given the prior intensity, the squad training focused on familiarity and light jogging. While the 1st Battalion found this restorative, it was essential for the 3rd Battalion, a new unit of strangers. Traditional Greek city-state practice involved rotating soldiers to prevent units from forming cliques that might threaten democratic order. Diffusi, however, believed fixed units fostered cohesion and honor. He kept soldiers in permanent teams, rotating officers only periodically to prevent them from claiming the troops as their own. Empty. With Kepis's help, Arsenis quickly integrated into the squad. The squad then merged into the Century for drill training, learning complex tactical signals, drum rhythms for speed, and bugle calls for maneuvers like advancing, retreating, or charging. They practiced following standard movements, pointing for direction, circling for holding position, and complex formations like shifting from columns to lines or forming dense phalanxes. They also practiced tactical maneuvers like center defense and flank assaults, and the fish scale formation, a grid-like arrangement similar to Rome's. Finally, the whole army practiced inter-unit coordination. Light infantry darted through gaps in the phalanx to skirmish, while cavalry, supported by peltasts with falx blades, prepared to strike. Arsenis was overwhelmed by the complexity, but with Kepis's guidance, he began to keep pace. Training ended while the sun was still high in the May sky. Lord Diffusi ascended the platform. The exhausted soldiers cheered as he asked, Brothers, what's next? Rugby. Are you familiar with the rules? Yes. Diffusi outlined the tournament. For fields, single elimination matches between squads, lasting 4 hourglasses each. Just as they prepared, Diffusi added, a new rule. Each squad must include 5 Lacanian slaves. The soldiers erupted in confusion. Senior officers like Kapus and Dracos knew this was Diffusi's attempt to integrate the Lacanians. No one dared refuse. 40 slaves, including Bagul, were brought to the field. Alexis had told the slaves this was a reward for their hard work, though the slaves remained suspicious. Most Lacanians didn't speak Greek, so Bagul translated. The slaves feared a trap. Alexis swore by the gods they would return by nightfall, so they nervously entered the camp. As the soldiers hesitated, squad leader Oliverus quickly grabbed Bagul and 4 others. The rest of the squads followed suit, snapping up the remaining slaves. Diffusi briefly explained the rules via Bagul, and the 5 slaves joined Oliverus's squad. The field was a 100 by 50-meter grass area marked with lime and wooden stakes. Diffusi mandated that centurions act as coaches and squad leaders as quarterbacks. He believed rugby mirrored ancient warfare, center clashes and flank maneuvers, perfect for training leadership, agility, and cohesion in his multi-branch army. They drew lots for the first possession. Oliverus won. His coach, Antonius, instructed, "Bagul, you're new. Just watch and learn for now." Bagul nodded, realizing it was indeed a game. The soldiers' intensity was infectious. Antonius assigned positions, telling the men to pass to Oliverus, who would hand off to the big man to test the opposition's strength. A whistle blew. Drax and the other judges, including Lades, oversaw the match. Soldiers removed their armor, wearing only linothorax and colored cloth strips to distinguish teams. With 55 men per side, they rotated frequently to manage the physical exhaustion of the sport. Dracos signaled the start of the match. As the hourglass turned, the Epitines team kicked off and charged. Antonius noted the opponent had fielded 5 slaves, likely to leverage their superior stamina. He decided to observe before adjusting his strategy. A soldier jumped to catch the ball, but was immediately swarmed by an opponent who, despite his linothorax, appeared to be a Lacanian. The ball carrier hesitated and was tackled, though he managed to secure the ball beneath him as he fell. Antonius's team groaned in disappointment while the opponents cheered, patting the Lacanian on the back. The attack was wasted. Per my rules, the offense had 3 attempts to advance 10 meters. Failing that, possession would turn over. Oliverus joked, "Xenotimus, did you tire yourself out with your wife last night? You can't even pass the ball." The team erupted in laughter. "All right, brothers, let's show them the strength of the army's finest platoon." As per the military law, the 1st Battalion's 1st platoon was the elite of the entire army. The soldiers roared, their spirits bolstered. Both sides lined up at the mark. The center locked in a struggle while the flanks prepared to receive or intercept. The whistle blew. Amidst the pushing, Antonius's men secured the rugby ball, passing it back to Oliverus, who hurled it toward the giant Tegetinos on the left. Tegetinos caught the ball, spun past a tackler, and surged forward. Xenotimus intercepted another defender attempting to tackle Tegetinos. Once the massive Tegetinos gained momentum, he was unstoppable, shrugging off 2 attempted tackles. Seeing him gain ground, Epitines shouted anxiously from the sidelines. A defender sprinted from behind and dived, wrapping his arms firmly around Tegetinos' legs. Tegetinos crashed to the grass, but held onto the ball. The Epitines team swarmed their teammate, a Lacanian named Lichomu, who grinned broadly despite not understanding their Greek cheers. Antonius's Lacanian soldiers gasped. "What are they saying?" Antonius asked Bagul. "They're cheering for Lichomu," Bagul replied. "He's a renowned warrior and hunter in our tribe." Antonius nodded thoughtfully as Drax checked on Tegetinos. Tegetinos stood up, signaling he was fine. "Due to the lack of protective gear, I strictly forbade dangerous hits like kicking or punching to prevent injury, with doctors standing by." "Good work. Let's push for the score," Oliverus encouraged, setting a new play. The game resumed. Oliverus passed to Tegetinos. Tegetinos ran, drew 2 defenders, and tossed the ball back to Oliverus. Protected by his teammates, Oliverus passed back to Tegetinos, who returned it once more. Feigning a 4th pass to Tegetinos, Oliverus suddenly whipped the ball to the right before being tackled. The ball soared 20 meters. A teammate jumped to catch it but missed and was tackled upon landing. As the crowd groaned, Antonius's team lost possession. The slaves on the sidelines shouted. "What are they saying?" Antonius asked. "They say they could have caught that," Bagul explained. "Lacanians are mountain hunters. Our jumping ability is unmatched." Antonius nodded. "We're on defense now. You 5 are in." Bagul was stunned, then thrilled to join the exciting game. "Also," Antonius added pointedly, "you should urge your kin to learn Greek so you can communicate on the field." As dusk fell, 800 Lacanian slaves waited anxiously at the site, some bickering with guards. Suddenly, the 40 slaves returned, laughing. "Are you all right?" their kin asked. "We're fine," Baguil reassured them, visibly excited. "This rugby game is amazing," one slave exclaimed. Baguil jumped, caught the ball in midair, dodged 2 men, and scored the winning touchdown. "It's called a touchdown," Baguil corrected. "If my team had better coordination, I would have beaten you in the finals." Lichuomu grumbled. "Brother, your poor coordination is due to the language barrier. To beat me next time, you must learn Greek," Baguil advised. Lichuomu nodded earnestly. The waiting slaves were confused by the talk of games and championships. However, as the returnees excitedly described the Amendolara training camp, the others became intrigued. Many resolved to work harder on the construction sites, hoping to be selected for the next game. From that day, construction progress in Amendolara surged. For old citizens like Arsenis, it was a sleepless night. Despite his hatred for the Lacanians who killed his parents, he found himself cheering and embracing his Lacanian teammates after they helped him score in the game. I had intentionally mixed 5 Lacanian slaves into each team to dissolve such hatred through the joy of collective victory. The next morning, as I prepared to inspect the water wheels, assists rushed in. "What happened?" I asked. "Kunigarata has been exiled from Thurii. He is heading toward Amendolara with his family and clansmen," Assist gasped. I was stunned. After the alliance was signed, Kunigarata had ordered an investigation into Thurii's treasury, claiming he needed to plan for its replenishment. During the audit, rumors spread. Kunigarata had forced the war against the Lacanians, ignoring the opposition of Fears and the mercenaries, and rejecting my superior plan. The rumors claimed Kunigarata's flight caused the phalanx to collapse, leading to Fears's death. Manipulated by agitators, these rumors, partially factual, spread rapidly. Grieving families, needing a scapegoat for their loss, turned their anger toward Kunigarata, surrounding the city hall with cries for his punishment. Kunigarata fled to his home, but the mob besieged his residence. He ordered his household to defend the gates while he stood on the walls, attempting to reason with the crowd. The standoff escalated when someone shouted, "Don't forget, he forced the gates shut, leaving our kin to be slaughtered by the Lacanians. He is a murderer." Though closing the gates had actually saved the city, the enraged mob, haunted by the memory of watching their loved ones die, ignored logic and focused on their hatred for the culprit. The mob breached the gates with logs. Only by feigning death and the protection of loyal slaves did Kunigarata survive the assault. The mob looted his home, killing one son and brutalizing his daughter. Empty, the mob ransacked his home, killing a son and driving his daughter to suicide. His property was stolen. The next day, a Bedouin Kunigarata offered his resignation. Still fearful of his potential retaliation, the mob demanded an assembly. General Niansis reluctantly agreed. The assembly voted to exile Kunigarata. Thus, the man who had protected Thurii from Spartan influence for years was ousted by the very ostracism the Athenians had invented. The assembly then elected new generals, Niansis as chief general, Burkos for his role in hiring me, while Ansitanos lost his seat for defending Kunigarata. Upon hearing the news, Kunigarata sighed. Though he could return in 10 years, he decided to leave forever. He sold his assets at a loss, visited only by Ansitanos. A day later, Kunigarata left with nearly 100 family members, clansmen, and loyal slaves. The citizens insulted and pelted them with debris as they departed. Kunigarata, lying in his carriage, remained calm, reflecting on how he had once exiled Athenian-descended citizens the same way. This was his retribution. He pondered the nature of Greek democracy, recalling the purged families of the past, until his son Dikeocrat pointed out Niansis watching from the city walls. Kunigarata looked up at Niansis. He realized immediately who had orchestrated his downfall, but felt no hatred. He gazed back at his mother city one last time with sorrow. "Niansis unleashed the beast of public opinion to destroy me," he muttered. "He lacks the skill to control it. It will be his undoing." "Will the bad man be exiled too?" Dikeocrat asked. "Who knows?" Kunigarata replied, turning toward the north. "Let's go to Amendolara." At the Saraceno River, I and my Senate members waited to greet them. Kunigarata ordered his carriage forward. I greeted him warmly. Lord Kunigarata, we are honored by your arrival. Our Senate has voted to grant you citizenship in Amendalara. Do you accept? This was a generous gesture, as Kunigarata remained a citizen of Thurii in exile. Relieved, Kunigarata thanked me. I am honored to be a fellow citizen with you, Lord Davos. His clansmen were equally relieved, fearing rejection due to the tense relations between the cities. I had kept the welcome low-key to avoid upsetting my own citizens. I admired Kunigarata's administrative record and suspected the political maneuvering behind his exile, making him a valuable asset. They avoided discussing Thurii during the journey. Treasurer Mercis bluntly informed them about housing. You may borrow empty homes, but I suggest buying them as prices are low. Your clansmen must rent, as they are not yet citizens. Kunigarata asked about the new immigration law and if his people could apply for citizenship. I explained the process. A 2-year probation to become a reserve citizen, followed by 2 to 3 years to become a formal citizen. 5 to 6 years? Kunigarata was surprised. Our law grants allotments to formal citizens, so we must be cautious, I emphasized. Kunigarata was shocked. Allotments were usually only for founding members. He wondered where the land would come from, but decided not to challenge the young Archon yet. He then asked about the slaves. It is possible, but difficult, I replied. I will do my best to reward their loyalty, Kunigarata said calmly. I was impressed by this change in character. You are a fortunate master to them. And Amendalara is fortunate to have you as Archon, Kunigarata countered. In these chaotic times, one must change to survive, I stated firmly. Seeing the Lacanian slaves working diligently, Kunigarata remarked, It is incredible how obedient they are. Because we gave them hope instead of death, I replied. Hope? Why must Greeks and Lacanians kill each other? Why not live in peace? I hinted. Kunigarata was stunned by the implication. Empty. Other cities hoard land and exclude outsiders. I believe people are the greatest wealth. With people, we create wealth and defend the city. With enough people, we gain more land, I declared. Kunigarata finally understood the source of the future allotments. His son Sostatus then asked about the warehouses and inns being built. Yes, I confirmed. Will the city manage them? Sostatus asked. No, Mercis interjected. We will auction the leases. Auctions? Sostatus asked. Can we participate? You are welcome to, Mercis replied. The next morning, Kunigarata took a walk, supported by his slaves. He observed the empty houses, realizing the heavy toll the war had taken on Amendalara. He saw former slaves, now freemen, working with a vitality unseen in Thurii. They greeted him with friendly, albeit broken, Greek. He learned they were paying a reserve citizen tax, working toward full status. It was June, and the mountain breeze kept Amendalara cool. As he walked, he saw citizens and new arrivals interacting harmoniously, all seemingly inspired by the prospect of citizenship. Kunigarata was surprised to see Lacanian women accompanying their husbands to the fields. Recognizing them by their features, he realized I was actively assimilating the Lacanians, not just paying lip service to the idea. Impressed by the city's vitality under me, Kunigarata noticed children heading toward the square, where Pythagorean disciples were teaching mathematics for free. Kunigarata was stunned to find the Pythagorean school here, suspecting Archytas' influence. He wondered how the democratic I could tolerate such an anti-democratic, aristocratic sect. He realized, however, that Amendalara was not a democracy under my rule. He arrived at the square to find a young man teaching basic math. The teacher was Mintotai Kirsi, who, along with Matakoris, had promised me they would recruit students, provided they passed the school's strict mathematical testing. Their recruitment failed. New citizens were too busy with their new land to study, while old citizens were preoccupied with mourning and wary of the Pythagoreans' reputation as a secretive, cult-like group. After days of failure, the pair discovered the Hades numerals, Arabic numerals, I had given Mercis. These simple symbols solved the Greeks' struggle with large numbers, promising to revolutionize mathematical research and education. When the pair asked to learn the system, Mercis refused, stating they were a gift from Hades via me and required my permission. I readily agreed, telling them that the true purpose of knowledge was to solve daily problems and improve life for everyone. My words deeply moved the two young men. I suggested they hold free public lectures in the square to build a base of math enthusiasts, which would eventually allow the Pythagorean school to take root in Amendolara. Unwilling to return to Tarentum in failure, the disciples decided to break tradition and teach publicly. I was delighted and immediately invited them to help design a water wheel. I had struggled to build a functional water wheel with local carpenters, realizing the project required precise mathematical and physical calculations. I turned to the two young Pythagoreans for help. Intrigued by the design, the pair viewed it as a divine tool for human improvement. Drawing on their training in mathematical mechanics under Archidus, they agreed to assist. While Minto Taikirsi taught in the square, Matakoris built the wheel on the Sini River. After his lecture, Minto Taikirsi rushed to the site to see the wheel successfully diverting water into irrigation channels. The citizens cheered, while the Lacanian slaves watched in awe, believing it to be a miracle. Cornelius exclaimed that the water wheel would add over 300 acres of fertile land to Amendolara. Scambras noted the added convenience for the citizens' daily water use. Maligi bluntly credited my design rather than Zeus, causing the old senators some discomfort. I allowed the comment to stand, wanting the old citizens to understand that Amendolara would shine under my leadership. The joy of the crowd contrasted with the unease of the old senators. Assists arrived to report Isam's return, and I handed the celebration duties to Cornelius. I returned to my residence with assists. Isam appeared exhausted and disheveled, barely recognizable after his mission. I insisted Isam bathe and eat before reporting, creating a relaxed atmosphere for our conversation. Over wine, Isam described infiltrating Laos, a stone port city, where he worked as a laborer and befriended enslaved Greeks. I correctly guessed the slaves were Greek. Isam revealed they were descendants of the Sybarites who built Laos. Once a prosperous trade hub, it was conquered by Nerulum after Sybaris fell. I asked about the status of the Greek slaves. Isam explained that some Greeks had defected to the Lacanians during the conquest. A leader named Avenogis, a descendant of these defectors, was now the most powerful figure in Laos, though he was mistrusted by the pure-blooded Lacanians. Isam noted that after I destroyed the Lacanian coalition, the Laos chieftain Tula returned in defeat, leaving Avenogis as the city's strongest leader. I guessed that Tula was now trying to eliminate Avenogis. Isam confirmed this, impressed by my intuition. Assis started to reprimand Isam for his informal behavior, but I stopped him. Isam reported that Avenogis was currently lying low, heavily guarded, and watching the situation in Nerulum. I listened intently. Isam explained he couldn't travel further north because Nerulum was on high alert following the death of their leader, Mutal, and the subsequent power struggle. I refilled Isam's cup. Isam revealed that the Virgae, a Brution people, were responsible for burning the Lacanian camp after the battle. I was surprised to learn it was the Virgae. Isam explained that the Virgae had been forced into the Lacanian alliance, but had since declared independence and fortified their borders. I pondered the implications of the Brudians, a neighbor I knew little about. Isam added that the Virgae had blocked the southern route from Laos. Assists impatiently asked for news of Gramentum. I kindly encouraged Isam to eat while he spoke. Isam obliged and shared his findings. I and Assists focused, knowing Gramentum was the primary antagonist. Isam described Pixis, a strong port city and rival to Gramentum. I suspected Pixis was also a former Greek city. Isam reported that Gramentum was in chaos. Their leader, Akebelu, was comatose, and various tribes were breaking away. A power struggle had emerged between Akebelu's son, Luzo, and Geninate, the son of the Pixis leader, Sensing. Empty, Assists questioned how a Pixis man could claim the leadership of Gramentum. Isam explained that Akebelu had married his daughter to Geninate to form an alliance. Now, both sides were gathering forces, and a civil war seemed imminent. I realized the Lacanian alliance was collapsing, presenting a perfect opportunity for Amendolara. I asked Isam to draw a map. Isam agreed. We sketched the region in the dirt, with Assists transcribing it onto parchment. I studied the map as Isam explained the geography. I realized Nerulum was the key to northern expansion. I fulfilled my promise, appointing Isam as leader of a new 20-man reconnaissance unit. Isam was thrilled. I sent him home to his family, mentioning the new water wheel that would benefit his land. Izum left, overjoyed. I stopped Izum, gifting him 2 large jars of wine to enjoy at his leisure. Izum thanked me profusely and left, happily carrying the jars. Assist expressed his annoyance at Izum's earlier lack of decorum. I laughed, telling Assist not to judge by appearances, but by character and intellect. I praised Izum's successful completion of a difficult mission, asserting that talent and good character are what matter. Yes, Lord Davos. I tasked Assists with analyzing the Lacanian situation for a discussion the next day. Kunigurata, feeling chest pain after breakfast, sought medical help at the Amandalra Hospital. The hospital, established by me, occupied 2 adjacent houses near the city gate. Kunigurata was stunned to find a massive queue of patients, which had spawned a bustling market nearby. I, unable to manage the crowd, ordered the construction of a larger facility to restore order. A guard denied Kunigurata priority, insisting that everyone, regardless of status, must wait in line unless in critical condition. Kunigurata was recognized by Thurians in the queue, leading to verbal abuse and a chaotic scene. Frustrated, he left, but his chest pain worsened overnight. Returning the next morning, he found the hospital closed for a medical lecture. The lecture was restricted to medical staff, leaving Kunigurata unable to enter. By noon, his condition deteriorated, forcing his son, Status, to interrupt the lecture. I, alerted to the emergency, immediately dispatched Herpulisai to treat him. Herpulisai diagnosed a punctured lung caused by untreated rib fractures from a past beating. Treatment began, and Kunigurata's condition improved. I realized the hospital needed a priority lane for Amandalra citizens to foster civic pride and prevent resentment. I also mandated that medical lectures must not disrupt emergency care. To address the doctor shortage, I planned to offer citizenship to foreign doctors who settled in Amandalra, a policy I intended to extend to teachers. Note: Caesar later enacted similar laws in Rome. Empty. Days later, news arrived that escaped Thurian mind slaves were seeking asylum in Amandalra, with Thurian envoys demanding their return. Tensions flared in the Senate between the Thurian envoy and the slave representatives. Plyzenas, a Thurian general, demanded the slaves return, threatening to break the alliance if Amandalra refused. The Senate erupted in uproar. Antonius rebuked Plyzenas for his arrogance, reminding him of proper diplomatic protocol. The senators laughed at the envoy. Plyzenas protested the presence of a slave in the sacred Senate. I silenced him, asserting that as the slave's representative, I had a right to be heard. Cornelius, the rotating chairman, invited the slave to speak. The slave, Aristocratides, revealed he was a Cyrenaican noble kidnapped by pirates and sold into slavery. He recounted how I had promised freedom to slaves who fought for Thurii against the Lacanians. His emotional testimony moved the senators. He explained that despite their sacrifice, they were returned to the mines, prompting their escape. Plyzenas dismissed his claims as lies. Antonius requested that free citizens who fought alongside the slaves be called to testify. The Senate agreed, ignoring Plyzenas's protests. I questioned Aristocratides about his education, noting his refined speech. Aristocratides explained his history as a manager for a wealthy merchant before being gifted to the state. I remarked that his hardships were a form of tempering by the gods. Aristocratides felt a surge of hope. The free citizens confirmed the slaves had indeed fought in the battle. Plyzenas argued that slaves fighting for their masters was common and that my promise was likely a fabrication. Aristocratides looked to me. I realized Plyzenas was subtly threatening me. I stood, affirming my promise of freedom, witnessed by Burkos and the Thurian generals. I demanded that Thurii honor the agreement. The senators joined in, calling for the slaves' freedom. Plyzenas panicked, claiming the agreement was a lie. Note: Silphium was a highly valued, extinct plant from Cyrenaica. Empty. I produced the signed document, which the senators verified. The Thurian generals had originally signed it expecting the mercenaries to be wiped out. Neansis, now in power, feared that freeing these slaves would trigger a revolt among the remaining thousands of mine slaves. Plyzenas tore the document to pieces in a desperate act of defiance. Scambras attacked Plyzenas, beating him for his treachery. Plyzenas screamed, accusing Amandalra of inciting war. I ordered Plyzenas expelled and offered to pay the slaves ransom to settle the matter legally. Mercis noted they lacked sufficient funds. I decided to issue an IOU from the Senate, promising payment later. If we do this, won't all the other former slave soldiers flock to Amandalora? Cornelius warned. Let them come. They shed blood for our victory against the Lacanians. Hades is my witness. We must honor our oath. I replied solemnly. That's far too generous to the Thurians. Mercis complained indignantly. The gods punish those who break their oaths, I said calmly. I turned to the stunned aristocratides and added, You are free. You may go wherever you wish. Aristocratides, trembling with excitement, replied, Thank you, my lord. We wish to stay in Amandalora, and I personally want to repay the cost of our freedom. Seeing his sincerity, I nodded in approval. Good. Plyzenas returned to Thurii and aggressively publicized Amandalora's evil deeds to incite public outrage. Amandalora countered by using Thurian patients visiting for medical treatment to spread the true account of the Senate proceedings back home. The Thurian public was left confused by the conflicting narratives. The Thurii City Hall soon demanded that Amandalora return the runaway slaves, threatening that failure to do so would be a breach of their alliance. The Amandalora Senate refused, reminding Thurii of their obligation to grant freedom to their benefactors. Thurii retaliated by banning its citizens from visiting Amandalora and imposing heavy taxes on merchants trading there. With Amandalora's storage facilities incomplete, the trade ban had little impact. However, Amandalora staged massive military drills by the Saraceno River, unnerving the Thurian farmers and slaves in the Sybaris Plain. Aside from protests, Thurii took no further action, and a tense silence fell between the two. I prioritized my integrity over the alliance. I believed that while the alliance could be repaired, breaking my word to the slaves would permanently damage Amandalora's reputation. Trust was the foundation of my new laws, and I refused to compromise it. Amidst this standoff, an envoy from Croton arrived in Thurii. In late June, the Amandalora Senate planned to hold trials to select athletes for the Isthmian Games, hoping to showcase the city-state's vitality to Greece. I even considered attending the games in Corinth as a guest to witness the classical competition firsthand. Just as the Senate finalized the selection plans, shocking news arrived from Thurii. The Crotonian envoy had come to accuse Thurii of violating their treaty by building a camp on the ruins of Sybaris. Neancis explained it was a temporary measure against the Lacanians, but the envoy refused to listen, demanding heavy compensation. In reality, Croton was financially drained from its war with the Bruttians and sought to exploit Thurii's perceived weakness for profit. Thurian generals realized this was extortion. Neancis, ever stingy, refused to pay, telling the envoy the council needed time to deliberate. Neancis secretly instructed Plyzenas to incite the public to protest at the envoy's inn, hoping to pressure the envoy and deflect future blame from the city hall. Neancis underestimated the volatility of the Thurian mob, which had become increasingly irrational. The mob was fueled by descendants of the original Sybarites, who harbored deep, ancestral hatred for Croton for destroying their city. They seized this opportunity to incite violence. The mob stormed the inn and beat the Crotonian envoy to death before Neancis could intervene with his guards. Empty, terrified, the Thurian generals and council scrambled to offer apologies and full compensation to Croton. I and my senate were stunned. Killing an envoy was a grave taboo that invited war. Amandalora immediately canceled its participation in the Isthmian Games to monitor the crisis. Father, the Thurians are finally going to be punished by the gods. So Status exclaimed. Cunagurata, the former chief general, sighed from his sickbed. I told you Neancis would ruin Thurii. When the Thurian envoy reached Croton, the generals there already knew of the murder. They rejected all offers of compensation, declaring, We will take what we want from Thurii ourselves. Croton had long resented Thurii's existence under Athenian protection. This incident provided the perfect pretext to settle old scores and replenish their treasury. The Crotonian assembly voted for war, mobilizing 7,000 citizen soldiers. Asprostum and Cilicium contributed 3,000 more, while Tyrrhena sent only 30 cavalry. Colonia was kept back to guard against the Locri League. For days later, after favorable omens at the Temple of Apollo, General Milancy led 10,000 troops toward Thurii. War finally erupted between Croton and Thurii. Upon learning of the Crotonian army's advance, Neansis, urged by his colleagues, proposed an emergency assembly of citizens. Neansis recounted the failed peace efforts and the Crotonians' harsh response, sparking outrage. However, silence fell when he revealed Croton had mobilized 10,000 elite Greek hoplites, renowned for their combat prowess. Oriphis, a vineyard owner, shouted, "We must send envoys to sue for peace and accept any terms." General Polyxene stood up, "Our treasury is empty. We cannot pay them without imposing a special war tax on the citizens." The mention of taxes plunged the assembly into silence. Fearful of war, the citizens begrudgingly agreed to the tax, though they doubted it would satisfy Croton. Plyzenas urged, "We must try. Wealth can be regained, but lost lives cannot." The proposal passed, and Neansis felt a temporary reprieve. Another citizen suggested, "Why not ask Tarentum to mediate? As the leader of the Great Greece Defense Alliance, they wouldn't want war between city-states, and Croton would fear their power." Neansis agreed, eager to appease the influential shipbuilder Ananias, who had proposed the idea. Ansitanos stood up. "What if Croton insists on war?" Neansis, despite their past friction, asked for his advice. Ansitanos replied, "Arm the citizens. We cannot face them in the open. Our high walls will wear down their morale." The assembly agreed, citing Thurei's successful defense against the Lacanians. Ansitanos added, "We must also request aid from our ally, Amendolara." Neansis winced, but the assembly cheered the suggestion. Someone remarked, "It was a mistake to ruin our relationship with Amendolara over a few slaves. They won't help us now." Neansis, visibly embarrassed, ordered Berkos to go. Berkos refused, suggesting Plyzenas instead. Plyzenas remained silent, knowing he would likely be beaten if he went. Berkos had previously urged the city to free the slaves to avoid the uprising that drove them to Amendolara. He knew Amendolara would reject Thurei's request unless they honored their promises. Neansis and the other generals had ignored Berkos, mocking his connection to me. Now, Berkos threw their own logic back at them. Neansis pleaded, "This is a matter of survival. Only you can convince me to send troops." Having made his point, Berkos agreed. Ansitanos suggested, "Amendolara is small. We must also mobilize the freemen and promise them immediate citizenship to ensure their loyalty." The assembly, driven by self-interest, balked at the idea of granting citizenship, leaving the proposal tabled. Meanwhile, the Crotonian army reached Crimissa. Crimissa, once a Sybarite colony, was bound by treaty to remain neutral in the conflict between Croton and Thurii. Ignoring the treaty, Crimissa opened its gates and contributed 1,000 men to the Crotonian army. Milanzusi, 45, was a celebrated wrestler and commander with a history of victories. Though brave, he was arrogant and unpopular for claiming sole credit for his successes. He ignored advice to be humble, believing his talent justified his vanity. Empty, I praised Assist for the detailed intelligence on Milanzusi. Assist noted that the commander's fame made information easy to gather. I wondered why such an arrogant man was chosen for such a critical campaign. Assist explained, "He has never lost a battle, and they likely paired him with the steady Timuras to temper his aggression." I nodded and asked, "What are the characteristics of the Crotonian citizen soldiers?" Croton's citizens are renowned athletes, consistently dominating wrestling, boxing, and discus at the 4 major games. Their citizen soldiers are consequently noted for their immense strength, aggressive offense, and agility in combat. I stroked my chin, questioning if their individual prowess translated to group discipline and whether they maintained regular military drills. Assist laughed, noting that unlike Amendolara's rigorous training, Crotonians spent far more time in the arena than on the drill field. I smiled, sensing Assist's critique of their training regimen. Assist defended himself, insisting he loved training, especially rugby. I pressed him, questioning if rugby even counted as proper training. After laughing, Assist asked if the war between Croton and Thurii would impact them. I sighed, noting that a weak neighbor is safer than a strong one. I lamented that Thurei's incompetence would force Amendolara to intervene, delaying my own plans to invade Lucania. Burkos arrived in Amendolara to plead for reinforcements. In the Senate, veteran senators like Cornelius and Raphaeus opposed intervention, arguing that Thurii brought this upon themselves and that the alliance was effectively dead. They deemed the Crotonian army too powerful to defeat, even with a joint effort. New citizen senators like Capua and Silius suggested a wait-and-see approach. Alexis and Antonius argued that protecting Thurii was essential for Amendolara's own security. They believed that by assisting in the defense of Thurii's high walls, they could force Croton to retreat within a month due to the logistical costs of feeding such a large army. Epitenes bluntly stated that they preferred a weak Thurii over a powerful Croton, unless the Senate was willing to join Croton's alliance. Burkos, waiting in the antechamber, remained unaware of the debate. Epitenes's words resonated, but the final decision rested with me. I addressed the Senate, emphasizing their sacred, oath-bound alliance with Thurii. I challenged them to honor their commitments despite the danger, rather than mocking Thurii's past betrayals. I urged them to prove to Magna Graecia that Amendolara upholds the honor and traditions inherited from heroes like Heracles, Teixiusai, and Agiliusi. I informed Burkos that Amendolara would honor the alliance and send reinforcements. Burkos was moved to tears. Croton's army, slowed by flooding, reached Castron, which surrendered without a fight and welcomed Mylingzusi. Mylingzusi met with the envoys from Thurii and Tarentum there. He dismissed the Thurii envoys' pleas, declaring that Croton's sword would not be sheathed without bloodshed. To the Tarentum envoy, he retorted that Tarentum would never accept mere financial compensation if a city-state violated an agreement and murdered their envoy. The Tarentum envoy was left speechless. Mylingzusi firmly insisted that Thurii must be punished. That night, guards informed Mylingzusi that two men had vital information regarding Thurii to trade. Intrigued, Mylingzusi ordered them brought in. Two sailors, looking timid, entered his quarters. Mylingzusi offered to reward them if the information proved valuable. One sailor identified himself as a freeman of Thurii. As the sailor spoke, Mylingzusi sat up, visibly excited. I, meanwhile, delayed my departure to observe the conflict, hoping to minimize my own casualties and secure the gratitude of Thurii by intervening at the critical moment. I waited to gauge Croton's strength, knowing Amendolara was only a half-day's march away. Neancis felt relieved by Amendolara's promise, boosting Thurii's morale. However, news of Croton's rapid advance and the surrender of Crimissa and Castron terrified him. He urged Burkos to hasten the reinforcements while considering arming the freemen. The next day, the Crotonian army halted and signaled a willingness to negotiate. Thurii's citizens felt a momentary reprieve, hoping for peace. That afternoon, Mylingzusi declared negotiations failed and ordered his army to march on Thurii. By the time Neancis received word, Croton's army was at the southern gate. As the attack began, freemen and slaves in the harbor districts revolted, attacking the defenders with hidden weapons. The southern gate, weakly defended and lulled by the false peace, was quickly overwhelmed by the internal uprising. Crotonian soldiers crossed the moat, scaled the walls, and opened the gates. They then boarded ships to bypass the city and strike the northern harbor. Thurii's generals scrambled to mobilize every citizen, including the elderly and youths, to suppress the internal revolt. Despite the citizens' desperate resistance against the rebels, the Crotonian army landed, turning the tide of the battle. Upon landing, the Crotonian forces immediately engaged the Thurian army, stabilizing the previously crumbling lines of the freemen. Fighting erupted in the narrow harbor streets. Despite being outnumbered, the Thurians fought with desperate ferocity, bolstered by the cries of their women, while the Crotonians struggled to deploy their superior numbers in the cramped alleys. Mylingzusi, delayed by a leaking ferry, arrived to find the docks crowded. Seeing the stalemate, he ordered the demolition of buildings flanking the alleys to clear a path. As Crotonian soldiers began a flanking maneuver, the Thurian resistance faltered. After suffering heavy casualties, the citizens finally broke and retreated. Neancis, the humble and beloved general, chose to face the enemy head-on and died under Crotonian spears, while Polixenes and other generals fled. Burkos and Plyzenas led survivors to the Acropolis, a sacred site housing the temple of Apollo and the altar of Hera, where the eternal flame had burned for 41 years. They resolved to make a final stand there. By nightfall, Manhwa surrounded the Acropolis with torches and sent Polixenes to deliver an ultimatum: surrender immediately or face the destruction of the sanctuary. Faced with the threat to their sacred site, and knowing Apollo was also a patron of Croton, the Thurians opened the gates. Croton had fully occupied Thurii. I was overseeing military drills when news of Thurii's fall arrived, shocking me and my officers. I never imagined Thurii would fall so easily, Silas remarked. Amyntas, skeptical of Croton's prowess, retorted, it was their failure to manage the conflict between freemen and slaves that doomed them. I analyzed the situation. The Crotonian general is capable. His deception and swift 5-hour conquest show a well-trained force. Aside from Clearchus's 800 Spartans, they are the strongest enemy we have faced. We must remain vigilant. We aren't afraid of them. Amyntas shouted. Good. That is the spirit. We respect the enemy, but we fear no one, I encouraged. Alexis asked, Legate, how shall we respond? I countered, what is your opinion? Alexis suggested, increase scouting of Crotonian movements and reinforce Amendalara. Excellent. We shall wait and see. I replied, pleased that none of my officers suggested appeasement. Watching my troops train, I felt no fear, despite the threat looming from the occupied city. In Thurii, Manhwa allowed his soldiers to run wild, looting, assaulting citizens, and terrorizing the population. Manhwa seized a luxurious mansion, evicting the owner to host a victory banquet for his officers. Intoxicated, he heard from a courtesan that a disciple of the historian Herodotus was in the city and ordered him brought forward. Ansitanos arrived to find a scene of debauchery, Crotonians lounging with wine and women, some of whom were clearly distressed Thurian captives. Amidst the boasting, vulgar jokes, and public indecency, Ansitanos walked across the wine-stained marble floor, his expression stern. Ah, the historian, Manhwa said, patting his companion. Give him a drink. Ansitanos took the wine and drank without hesitation. An officer mocked him. Are you drinking to our victory, Thurian? No. Ansitanos replied calmly. I am mourning Sybaris. It was once powerful and Croton weak, just as the roles are reversed today. But those who abuse their strength eventually perish. Manhwa laughed. Yet it was weak Croton that destroyed powerful Sybaris. Your logic is flawed. By the gods, even the greatest city-states eventually fall, Ansitanos retorted. Manhwa belched, unimpressed. Perhaps, but we won't live to see it. As a student of Herodotus, will you record my name and this glorious victory in your history? I will record only the crimes and atrocities you have committed here, Ansitanos replied coldly. The officers erupted in fury, hurling food at him. Manhwa waved them off, smugly stating, victors prove their strength through action. The defeated only offer excuses. Heroes enjoy the spoils of war. No one cares for the suffering of the conquered. He then asked, I heard the Archon of Amendalara, wiped out 10,000 Lacanians with 6,000 men. Was that my doing, or Tarentum's? It was his planning and organization, Ansitanos confirmed. He sounds like a man of character, Manhwa mused. I wonder who is superior, he or I? Ansitanos looked at him and said, you have the backing of powerful Croton. He has only tiny Amendalara. So what? Manhwa sneered, his face flushed with drink. Our origins are destiny, and his destiny is failure. He demanded, Thurii and Amendalara are allies. I heard Amendalara promised reinforcements when I approached. Is that true? Ansitanos confirmed that Amendalara's envoys had promised Thurii would hold once reinforcements arrived, pointedly emphasizing their resolve, which visibly irritated Manhwa. Manhwa ordered Timoras to demand Amendalara break its alliance with Thurii and join Crotone instead. Timoras hesitated, noting Amendalara's alliance with Tarentum. Manhwa retorted that if they could ally with Thurii, they could certainly ally with Crotone. Timoras reluctantly agreed. Manhwa pondered my reaction as news of Crotone's conquest of Thurii spread across Magna Graecia, drawing intense scrutiny. Major powers like Tarentum, Locri, Rhegium, and Syracuse, the latter currently preparing for war against Carthage, watched closely. Dionysius of Syracuse, married to the sister of Locri's chief general, viewed Crotone's expansion as a threat to his long-term strategic interests. Crotone's envoy arrived in Amendolara with orders to submit, creating a tense political atmosphere. The Senate erupted into heated debate. Cornelius, Raphias, and Citolomboli argued for temporary submission to avoid destruction. Scambras, Tritodemos, and Protesilaus suggested stalling and seeking pressure from Tarentum. The new citizen senators, outraged by the envoy's arrogance, demanded a firm military stand against Crotone. Knowing my authority as Archon for life depended on my military reputation, I refused to show weakness. I insisted that Amendolara must honor its commitments to maintain trust with Tarentum and preserve its honor. My firm stance concluded the session. When the envoy received the rejection, he threatened Amendolara with the same fate as Thurii. I coldly replied, "You are welcome to try." The envoy returned with a letter. Amendolara respected Crotone's victory, but was bound by sacred oaths to its allies. Mylingzusi tore the letter up, mocking the idea of a mercenary-turned-leader keeping promises. He ordered Timoras to mobilize 8,000 men to teach the small city a lesson. Despite Timoras's concern regarding Tarentum, Mylingzusi insisted he would act carefully. The army marched north. Amendolara's scouts reported the movement, causing widespread alarm. Cornelius and his faction again urged me to seek a compromise. I shut them down, declaring I would never beg for peace under threat of arms. While the new citizen senators clamored for battle, I restrained them. I ordered everyone to retreat behind the walls and prepare for defense. Tarentum's Senate held an emergency meeting upon hearing the news. Senators condemned Crotone's aggression against their ally as an insult to Tarentum. However, they remained cautious about direct intervention, wary of a protracted war between the major powers of Magna Graecia. Archidus volunteered to meet Mylingzusi, and a messenger was dispatched to Crotone. Mylingzusi arrived at the foot of Mount Amendolara, noting the well-defended walls and the tactical disadvantage the morning sun posed for an attacker. He ordered his phalanx to advance with war cries, but the Amendolara soldiers remained silent on the walls. Arsenies questioned why they didn't retaliate. Sergeant Kepis silenced him, citing strict adherence to my orders. Arsenies complied. Kepis reminded him to wait. If the enemy attacked, they would respond. Arsenies gripped his spear, eager to test his training. Mylingzusi's attempts to goad me into a dialogue failed as the city remained silent. Assuming fear, Mylingzusi had his men taunt me as a coward. The insults continued, claiming Amendolara was too terrified to speak. The new recruits grew angry, but veterans reminded them that I had defeated the Persians while these Crotonians were likely still in the gymnasium. The veterans remained disciplined, conserving their strength. The Crotonians eventually grew hoarse from shouting. Frustrated, Mylingzusi ordered the burning of the warehouses and inns at the foot of the hill as a warning. As the structures burned, the Amendolara soldiers watched with silent, burning rage, their faces illuminated by the flames as the Crotonians retreated. Back in the Senate, I remained calm, listening to Assista's report to analyze Mylingzusi's character and psychological state. Are the Crotonians declaring war on us? Raphias asked in shock. They have invaded our territory and burned our homes. That is already a declaration of war. Felicius reminded him. Citolomboli, previously advocating for compromise, now shouted in fury. They've bullied us to our faces. Why haven't our soldiers retaliated? Our soldiers have strictly followed my orders to hold the city, but they are itching to tear the Crotonians apart. Amyntas vented his frustration. Archon, are we just going to watch them run wild on our land? Scambras roared, unwilling to stand by. Of course not. I replied, my eyes gleaming. We pull our fist back only to strike harder. Croton is stronger, so we must be like a skilled boxer. Defend, wait for the opening, and deliver a fatal blow. The assembly was stunned. By the time Archidus landed in Thurii, Mylingzusi had returned to the city. Archidus lodged a formal protest on behalf of Tarentum. Mylingzusi dismissed it, claiming he had no malice toward Amendolara and merely wanted to greet the cowardly, young Archon who refused to meet him. Archidus breathed a sigh of relief, but warned, if Croton attacks Amendolara, Tarentum will unite with Metapontum and Heraclea to wage war against you. He further advised, since Croton has already reclaimed Thurii and won its glory, you should return home and restore peace. Locri and Tarentum would appreciate it. Mylangzisi understood the threat, but remained silent, his face grim. After his mission, Archytas hurried to Amendalara. Seeing the smoking ruins of warehouses and inns at the foot of the hill, his anxiety returned. Inside the city, seeing the citizens' rage, he expressed his condolences to me and stated frankly, Tarentum has no intention of fighting Croton right now. I hope you understand. Rest assured, I said calmly. We are angry, but we have restraint. Does a man bite back when bitten by a dog? Archytas felt uneasy at my calm. He recalled how, after defeating the Lacanian coalition, my men had rested, only to announce the next day that they had retaken Amendalara. Meanwhile, in the Croton City Hall, the Senate debated the fate of the occupied Thurii. The conservative General Lysias suggested looting the city's wealth, installing a puppet government, and withdrawing to avoid regional backlash. The radical chief General Milan argued that since Thurii harbored deep hatred, a puppet regime would fail. He proposed burning the city to avoid the burden of a garrison and to prevent further hostility from Tarentum. Burn the city? The others were shocked. Yes, Milan declared. Our ancestors destroyed Sybaris to establish our hegemony. Since our defeat by Locri and Regium, our prestige has waned. This is a divine opportunity to restore our majesty. He added, by destroying Thurii, we turn the Sybaris plain into a blank slate. We can invite friendly settlers and our own landless citizens to build new cities, expanding our power northward. Milan's plan was persuasive and won the majority's support. A messenger reached Thurii, and a thrilled Mylangzisi boasted, as the general who destroys the third city on the Sybaris plain, I shall be immortalized in history. He ordered his freemen to rebuild the pontoon bridge over the Crathis River. He then fabricated charges against Thurian merchants, imprisoning and executing them to seize their wealth. Impatient, Mylangzisi soon ordered a total plunder of the city's grain and assets. As the city wailed in despair, Amendalara's scouts watched from afar as Crotonian soldiers marched the Thurian populace out of the city. Soon, smoke billowed and flames engulfed the city. The scouts reported back to Lades. Lades was horrified and rowed across the Saraceno River to confirm the disaster. Thurii was a sea of fire. When I received the news, I was stunned. Croton was burning the city to retreat. While assists cursed Croton's brutality, I sat in deep thought, calculating the implications for Amendalara.